Clara Whitmore pressed her bleeding hands against her mouth and prayed no one would find her. She had walked 31 miles in the Colorado heat. She had not eaten in 2 days. She had lost everything. Her name, her work, her dignity to people who never had to answer for what they took. But she did not cry. She stood at the iron gate of Blackwood Ranch and lifted her chin. If this cowboy turned her away, she had nowhere left to go. She knocked anyway. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button and come along for every chapter. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1881 came to the Colorado mountains like a punishment. The sun drove down hard on the high country, burning the creek beds, shallow and cracking the earth along the lower pastures of Blackwood Ranch. The pines held their color dark and stubborn against the pale sky, and the peaks above them still carried thin lines of white along their crowns. But down in the valley where the cattle grazed and the ranch hands worked from first light until last, the heat sat on a man's shoulders like something alive, something that wanted him to quit. Ethan Blackwood did not quit. He had not quit in 15 years, not since he built this place up from a single cabin and 40 head of cattle he'd bought with every dollar he'd ever saved. He had not quit during the winter of '74, when the snow came so deep it buried the fence posts and 3 of his men lost toes to frostbite. He had not quit after Rebecca died. He never quit. But some mornings like this one, when the light came gold and slow through the kitchen window and the coffee went cold before he finished it, and the house was so quiet he could hear the clock ticking in the hallway 40 feet away. Some mornings, Ethan Blackwood sat in his chair and wondered what exactly he was holding on for. He was 38 years old. He owned 1,200 acres of the finest mountain land in Colorado Territory. He ran 300 head of cattle, employed 11 men, and had more money in the bank in Denver than he would likely spend in his lifetime. The county commissioner called him a model citizen. The newspaper in Glenwood Springs had printed his name twice in the last year, once for donating lumber to rebuild the schoolhouse, once for tracking down a gang of rustlers that had been bleeding the smaller ranches dry for 2 seasons. People around here respected Ethan Blackwood. Not one of them knew what it felt like to sit in that kitchen at 6 in the morning and feel absolutely nothing. He set down his cup, pushed back from the table. Ethan. Thomas Hale appeared in the doorway. Thomas had been managing the ranch for 9 years. He was a lean, plain-faced man from Kansas, with a permanent squint and the steady temperament of someone who had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. He did not knock. He had learned years ago that Ethan did not care about that kind of formality. But this morning something was different in the way Thomas stood there, something careful in his face. "What is it?" Ethan said. Not a question. A door opened for information. "There's a woman at the front gate." Ethan waited. "She walked here," Thomas said. "Best I can tell, she walked a long way. She's carrying one bag, not much in it from the look of it. Her shoes are—" He stopped, tried again. "Her feet are in bad shape, Ethan." "What does she want?" "Work. She says she wants work." Ethan looked at him. "We're not hiring." "I know that." "Then tell her." Thomas didn't move. Ethan looked at him a second time. Thomas Hale had delivered difficult news to difficult men his whole adult life. He did not linger in doorways. He did not look at the floor. "Thomas?" "She's been standing out there for a while," Thomas said quietly. "Before I came to find you. I watched her from the fence. She didn't knock again. Didn't holler. Didn't sit down." He paused. "She just stood there, straight, like she was prepared to stand there all day if that's what it took." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. She heard him before she saw him. Boots on dry ground, steady, no hurry, no hesitation. The kind of walk that belonged to a man who was used to arriving somewhere and having that mean something. Clara kept her chin up. She had learned that trick from her mother. "Keep your chin up, Clara. People treat you the way you present yourself. If you fold, they'll fold you further." She had not folded. Not when the Hargrove family told every shopkeeper in Millhaven that she had stolen from their household. Not when Mrs. Hargrove stood in the middle of the street and said loud enough for everyone to hear that Clara Whitmore was a thief and a liar, and no decent person in this town would employ her again. Not when the boarding house turned her out the next morning, the landlady refusing to meet her eyes, as she handed over her bag and told her she was sorry, but she couldn't afford the trouble. Not during 31 miles of road and 2 days without a real meal. She had not folded, but her hands were shaking under the handle of her bag, and she was aware of that, and she held tighter to make it stop. The man who came through the gate was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she'd expected. Some soft landowner maybe, or an old man with kind eyes. What she got was someone tall and broad-shouldered and weathered, in the way that Colorado sun weathered everything up here, burning things down to what they actually were. He stopped about 8 feet from her, looked at her the way a man looked at something he was trying to understand. She looked back at him the same way. "You walked here," he said. "Yes, sir." "From where?" "Millhaven." He said nothing. Millhaven was 30 miles as the crow flew, more by road. The calculation moved behind his eyes. "You have family somewhere?" he asked. "No, sir." "Somebody expecting you anywhere?" "No." "References from previous work?" Clara felt the question land in her chest. She had references. She had 3 letters written by people who had known her real work, known her real character. But the Hargroves were the kind of family whose name meant more than any letter ever could in this part of the territory, and she had learned that lesson the hard way. "Not the kind that would help me," she said. He tilted his head slightly. Not dismissal. Something more like listening. "What's your name?" he said. "Clara Whitmore. Ethan Blackwood." He didn't extend a hand. Neither did she. "What kind of work are you looking for, Miss Whitmore?" "Whatever kind you need done. Cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the kitchen garden if you have one. I've managed a household of 11 people. I know livestock enough to help with basic care. I can keep accounts." She paused. "I work hard. I don't complain. And I won't cause you trouble." His expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in it. "What kind of trouble," he said, "would I be taking on if I said yes?" She had promised herself she wouldn't do this. She had told herself she would be straightforward, that she would not try to hide what had happened in Millhaven, because she was not a liar, and she had nothing to be ashamed of, and because a man like this would find out anyway. But standing here looking at the only open gate left to her for 100 miles in any direction, she felt the words stick. She pressed on anyway. "There are people in Millhaven who will tell you I stole from a family I worked for," she said. "The Hargroves. It isn't true. But they have more money and more influence than I do, and they've made sure their version of events is the one people heard first. If anyone from that town contacts you about me, that's the story they'll tell." He watched her say all of it. He didn't interrupt. "Did you steal from them?" he said when she finished. "No." "Why did they say you did?" Clara held his gaze. "Because the youngest Hargrove son wanted something I wouldn't give him, and when I refused him, he needed a reason for why I had to go." A long silence. The heat pressed down on both of them. Somewhere behind her, out on the road, a bird called twice and stopped. Ethan Blackwood said, "You can stay." She blinked. She had not expected it to be that simple. She had prepared for argument for conditions for the kind of negotiation that required her to diminish herself piece by piece until the person across from her decided she was small enough to be worth the risk. "Just like that," she said before she could stop herself. "Just like that," he said. "You don't know me." "No." He reached up and adjusted his hat against the sun. "But I know what a lie looks like on a person's face, Miss Whitmore, and I know what the truth looks like. You told me the truth." He turned back toward the gate. "Come on then. Thomas will show you where things are." She stood there one more second, holding her bag, feeling something in her chest loosen just slightly, like a knot worked at for a long time. Then she followed him through the gate. Thomas Hale showed her the cookhouse, the small room off the back of the main house that would be hers, The kitchen garden half dead from neglect, the herb beds gone to weeds, the tomatoes struggling, and the cold cellar where provisions were stored. He was polite. Not warm exactly, but not unkind. He answered her questions without elaborating, handed her a list of mealtimes and ranch schedules written in neat, small handwriting, and told her she'd meet the rest of the men at supper. How many, she asked. 11 hands, me and Mr. Blackwood. 13 mouths. Any food preferences I should know about allergies? Anything like that? Thomas looked at her like the question surprised him. Nobody's ever asked that before, he said. I'm asking now. He thought about it. Pete Calloway won't eat onions, makes a whole business out of it. A pause. Other than that, I think they're just grateful for hot food. All right, she said. I'll have something ready by noon. He nodded and left her to it. The men came in for the midday meal, talking among themselves, and stopped when they saw the table. She had found dried beans and salt pork, and made a stew that filled the whole cookhouse with the kind of smell that reached into a person's hunger and grabbed hold. She had baked cornbread in the heavy iron pans she'd found stacked in the corner. She had made coffee strong enough to stand up to the afternoon heat. She had found a jar of preserved peaches in the back of the cold cellar and set it out. They ate without much talking, which she understood to be the highest compliment. One of the younger hands. He couldn't have been more than 18. A freckled, red-haired boy who'd introduced himself as Cody looked up from his bowl and said, "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but whoever was cooking before you shouldn't have been allowed near a stove." "Cody," Thomas said. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." A rumble of agreement moved around the table. Clara kept her expression neutral, but something warm moved through her. Ethan Blackwood sat at the head of the table, which she had expected, but he ate without calling attention to himself, which she had not. He asked Thomas a question about the fence line on the north pasture. He listened to one of the hands, a big man named Roy Decker, describe a section of creek bank that was washing out. He drank his coffee and watched the room the way a man watched something he was responsible for. He didn't look at her once. She noticed that. The first week passed in work and in learning. She learned that the ranch woke at 4:30, that the hands ate breakfast before sunrise, and were out on the range by the time the light turned gold. She learned that Thomas ran the daily operations with quiet competence, and that the men respected him without really warming to him. She learned that Roy Decker was the informal leader among the hands, that what he thought mattered to the others, and that he had spent the first 3 days watching her with barely concealed suspicion. She learned by the third day why the kitchen garden was dead. Mr. Blackwood's wife planted it, Cody told her quietly when they were the only two left in the cookhouse after supper. He was helping her carry dishes without being asked which she had noted. She passed about 5 years back. Nobody's touched it since. I don't think Mr. Blackwood could stand to look at it. Clara was quiet for a moment. What happened to her? Accident on the mountain. She was an experienced rider, but something spooked the horse on a narrow pass. He stopped. He brought her home himself, carried her down. A pause. He didn't come out of the house for 4 days. She looked at the garden through the window, the dried stalks, the dead herb beds. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I just thought you should know," Cody said, "before you go making any changes out there." She did not touch the garden for 5 days. On the 6th day, she was up before the hands in the early gray before the sun, and she knelt in the dirt beside the herb bed and began pulling weeds. Not dramatically, not making anything of it. Just working slowly and carefully the way she had learned to do anything she wanted to last. She didn't know he was watching until she heard the porch step creak. She did not turn around. She kept working. He stood there for what felt like a long time. Then she heard his boots on the ground, and the sound moved away from her toward the barn. Away. She exhaled slowly. She kept pulling weeds. On the 9th day, Roy Decker stopped her after breakfast. He was a big man, wide through the chest with a thick dark beard and hands that looked capable of breaking most things they got hold of. He stood in the doorway of the cookhouse with his hat in his hands, and an expression on his face that she could not quite read. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Decker, I want to say something, and I want you to know it ain't easy for me to say." She waited. "I've been working this ranch for 6 years," he said. "I watched it run down, and I watched it try to hold together after Mrs. Blackwood passed, and I watched Mr. Blackwood—" He stopped, started again. "He's a good man, best I've ever worked for. But after she passed, it was like the lights went out in him. We all saw it, couldn't do nothing about it." Clara was very still. "What you've done in 9 days," Roy said. "I don't know how to explain it right. The food, the garden, the way you talk to the men like they're worth talking to. It's—" He pushed his hat around in his hands. "It ain't just the work. Something's different around here. Something that's been missing." She didn't know what to say to that. "I was hard on you when you came," he said. "In my head, I mean. Made up my mind about you before I knew anything. I'm telling you that's wrong, and I'm sorry for it." She looked at him for a moment. This big, weathered man turning his hat in his hands, choosing honesty when he didn't have to. "Thank you, Mr. Decker," she said. "I appreciate that." He nodded sharp the way men nodded when they were finished with a thing. Put his hat back on. "Cody says you make the best cornbread he's ever had," he said, already moving away. "I'm inclined to agree with him." She smiled at his back. On the 11th day, she found Ethan Blackwood in the barn at dusk, sitting on an overturned crate with a piece of tack in his hands that he wasn't fixing. Just holding. Staring at the middle distance. She had come to check on the old chestnut mare that had seemed off her feed since Tuesday. She stopped when she saw him. Considered retreating. She didn't. She went to the chestnut stall, opened it quietly, slipped inside, and began checking the mare over. Running her hands along the horse's neck, checking her eyes, her gums. The horse leaned into her slightly. "She's been off since Tuesday," Ethan said from behind her. "I know. I thought she might be lonely. She's stabled alone down here." A pause. "She's always been down here." "I know." Clara moved her hand along the mare's jaw. "Animals get lonely same as people." Another pause. "What's her name?" Clara asked. "Juniper." "That's a good name." She kept working slow and calm the way you worked with something fragile that needed to trust you first. "She misses company. If you moved her up near the other horses for a few weeks, I think she'd come right." Silence. Then, "I'll tell Thomas." "All right." She finished her check and stepped out of the stall, latching it quietly. Turned to go. "Miss Whitmore." She stopped. Ethan Blackwood was looking at her. Not the way he usually looked at her, which was carefully and from across a room. Something more direct than that. "The garden," he said. "You're working on the garden." It wasn't a question, but she answered it like one. "Yes." "You knew it was hers." "Yes." She held his gaze. "If that's not all right with you, I'll leave it alone. I won't touch it again." He was quiet so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "She would have wanted it to grow." And he stood up and walked past her out of the barn without another word. 3 weeks in a rider came from town. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the horse. She heard Thomas meet the rider in the yard. She heard a voice she didn't recognize, and then she heard Ethan's voice, and then the sound of the conversation dropped too low for words. She kept her hands busy and told herself it was nothing. 15 minutes later, Ethan came through the back door of the kitchen. He pulled out a chair and sat down across the table from her. He put a folded piece of paper on the table between them. She looked at it. Did not touch it. "Letter from the county sheriff's office in Millhaven," he said. "Asking if I employed a woman named Clara Whitmore, saying she was let go from the Hargrove household under suspicion of theft and that the family would like to be informed of her whereabouts." Clara's hands were very still in her lap. "What did you tell the rider?" she asked. "I told him I employed a woman named Clara, last name of Webb, who came here with a reference from a ranch in Wyoming, and that she'd been here 3 months and was one of the best workers I'd employed." She stared at him. You lied for me. I told a man who works for a corrupt sheriff's office that his information was wrong, Ethan said. I don't consider that the same thing. Mr. Blackwood, they're not going to stop, he said. People like the Hargroves don't let things go. You should know that if you don't already. Whatever you did to make that boy angry, he isn't finished trying to make you pay for it. Clara looked down at the table. I refused him, she said very quietly. He wanted... She stopped, breathed, tried again. He came to my room one night. I told him to leave. I made enough noise that the household heard. He left. She pressed her lips together. 3 days later, his mother told me a piece of jewelry had gone missing and that the maid had seen me near Mrs. Hargrove's room. It hadn't and she hadn't. But by the time I could say so, it didn't matter. Ethan sat across from her and said nothing. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I brought trouble to your ranch. I can go. You're not going anywhere, he said. The words were flat and certain as a stone dropped in water. She looked at him. You're not going anywhere, he said again. You work for me. This is my land. The Hargroves don't have authority here, and neither does any sheriff that takes their money. He pulled the letter off the table and folded it in half. I'll have Thomas draft a response, official enough to satisfy them for a while. And when they're not satisfied, he looked at her across the table, and for the first time she could read something clearly in his face. Not warmth exactly. Something older and harder than warmth. Something that had been decided a long time ago before she ever arrived. Then we'll deal with it, he said. Together. She did not cry. She had not cried since she left Millhaven, and she was not going to start now. But something in her chest cracked open just a little in a way she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said. It came out rougher than she intended. He stood, put his hat back on. Supper ready at 6, he said. She pulled in a breath. Yes. He nodded and walked back out. 4 weeks, 5. The garden came back. The tomato plants straightened and began to flower. The herb beds filled in green and fragrant. She planted squash along the south wall, the way Rebecca Blackwood's notes in the old kitchen book suggested she'd found the book on a shelf behind the flower canisters, small and worn, the handwriting inside careful and a little formal. She had asked Thomas if she might use it. He had gone still for a moment, and then said quietly that he thought that would be all right. She cooked from it sometimes. Not always she had her own ways. Her own recipes she carried in her head, but sometimes she followed the notes in that small book and felt in a way she couldn't fully explain that she was doing something right. The men noticed the difference in the food. They noticed the difference in the house. Clean curtains. A rug beaten out and rehung in the hallway. The wood floor in the main room polished until it caught the light. Cody said it felt like somewhere people actually lived. Roy Decker said it felt like a home. Ethan Blackwood said nothing, but he started eating breakfast inside at the kitchen table instead of standing at the porch rail with his cup. He started coming in for supper before Thomas called it. He started, and this was the thing she noticed most. The thing she didn't say anything about. He started staying in the kitchen after supper when she was cleaning up with some piece of work in his hands, a harness to mend, or a letter to read. Not talking. Just present in the room. She didn't comment on it. She handed him coffee when she made a second pot. He took it without a word. 5 weeks in, on a Sunday evening when the heat had broken slightly and the air coming down from the mountains smelled of pine and distant rain, Clara was in the kitchen garden, sitting on the low stone wall and reading from a small book she'd brought in her bag from Millhaven. The only thing she'd brought besides 2 dresses and her mother's ring on a chain around her neck. She heard the porch door. She didn't look up. Footsteps crossed the yard and stopped nearby. She heard him lean against the garden fence. A long quiet. "What are you reading?" he said. "Poetry," she said. "Tennyson." Another quiet. "Rebecca liked Tennyson," he said. She closed the book over her finger to hold the page. Looked at him. He was looking at the garden, at the plants, the green rose, the stone wall she was sitting on. Something in his face that she had not seen there before, or had not been meant to see. "I know I've been using her kitchen book," she said. "If that bothers you, I'll stop." "It doesn't bother me," he said. He was quiet again for a moment. "She'd have liked what you did with it." He paused. "She'd have liked you." Clara didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "I mean that." He looked at her, really looked at her. "I know you do," he said. The evening light came long and gold across the garden, and neither of them spoke for a while, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that two people arrived at when they had stopped needing to prove something to each other. She opened her book again. He stayed at the fence until the light faded. It was Cody who came running. She was in the cookhouse early on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks to the day she had walked through the gate of Blackwood Ranch, when she heard the boy's boots coming fast across the yard. "Miss Clara!" He hit the door hard enough to rattle it. "Miss Clara, come quick, it's Mr. Blackwood. He's been hurt up on the North Ridge." She was already moving. They brought him in on a makeshift stretcher, 2 planks and a canvas, carried by Roy and another hand named Dan. He was conscious which Thomas had told her on the run-up was a mercy, because he had gone off the edge of a ledge on the North Ridge. While checking the fence line, his horse had spooked at a rattlesnake thrown him and landed on an outcrop 15 feet below. His left arm was broken. She could see that without touching it, the unnatural angle of it below the elbow. His left side was badly bruised, possibly ribs, and there was a long gash along his cheekbone where he'd hit the rock face on the way down. She had set broken bones before. She had stitched cuts before. Her mother had been the nearest thing to a doctor their small Ohio town had had when she was growing up, and she had learned at her side from the time she was 8 years old. She didn't hesitate. "Set him on the table," she said. "Thomas, I need the medical kit from the cold room. Cody, clean water as much as you can bring. Roy, I need 2 straight pieces of wood and something to bind with." She was already pulling off her apron, tying her hair back. "And someone needs to get that gash clean before it sets in." Ethan looked at her from the table. His face was the gray-white of a man in significant pain, but his eyes were alert. "You know what you're doing," he said. "Yes," she said. "All right then." He closed his eyes. "Do it." She worked for over an hour. She cleaned the gash first, which made him go very still and breathe very slowly, the way a man breathed through something he'd decided not to make noise about. She stitched it 7 stitches, neat and close, and then she set his arm, which he did make noise about brief and sharp, before setting his jaw and saying nothing more. She splinted it and bound it tight. She pressed along his rib cage until she found the places that made him flinch, and told him 2 were cracked, likely 3 that he needed to rest and breathe carefully and not do anything that put weight on his left side for at least 6 weeks. He opened his eyes. 6 weeks. At minimum. "I can't be off for 6 weeks. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "you can argue with me or you can heal. Both of those things cannot happen at the same time." A pause. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She sat with him that evening. He had argued about that too, and she had ignored the argument and sat in the chair by the window while he lay in the bed in the downstairs room. Stairs were not possible, and pretended he wasn't falling asleep every 15 minutes. He woke just after dark, disoriented for a moment, and she said, "You're in the downstairs room. You've been asleep about 3 hours. How's the arm?" He blinked, found her in the dark. "Still attached," he said. "Good." That was the goal. She stood and poured water from the pitcher on the table and brought it to him. He took it with his right hand. "You don't have to sit here," he said. "I know," she said. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She went still. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did today. I mean it." She looked at him. This man in pain genuine to the bones, saying thank you like it cost him something. "Get some sleep," she said. "The arm needs rest more than it needs talking." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he lay back. She sat in the chair until she was sure he was sleeping again. Outside the window, the Colorado night came down dark and full of stars. And somewhere up on the mountain, the wind moved through the pines, and she listened to it and felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Safe. Strange, frightening word. Impossible word, maybe. But she sat in that chair in the dark and felt it anyway. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since she left Millhaven, she slept without dreaming of the road. He tried to get up on the second day. Clara heard the sound before she saw it. A slow, heavy creak from the downstairs room. Then a sharp intake of breath, then nothing. She set down the bread dough she was working and walked through the kitchen to the doorway of his room. Ethan Blackwood was sitting on the edge of the bed, boots in his right hand, his face the color of old ash, trying to tie a lace one-handed and failing with a dignity that was almost painful to watch. "No," she said. He looked up. "I need to check the north pasture fence. Roy doesn't know where I marked the weak sections. Roy has been working this ranch for 6 years. And I've been working it for 15. He got one loop of the lace. I'll be back before noon. Mr. Blackwood." She crossed the room, took the boot out of his hand and set it on the floor. He stared at her. She met his eyes without flinching. "You have 2 cracked ribs and a broken arm. If you go out on that fence line today, you'll crack the ribs through, and then you won't be back by noon. You'll be back by Christmas." A long, charged silence. "I'm not a man who lies in bed," he said. "I know that," she said, "but you're a man with sense enough to know when the ground rules have changed." She straightened up. "I'll send Cody to ride the fence line with Roy. You can tell me exactly where you mark the weak sections, and I'll make sure Cody writes it down. Then you'll eat breakfast and rest, and tomorrow we can talk about what you can do from a chair." He looked at his boot on the floor. He looked at her. "You're not going to let me win this one," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." He exhaled, sat back against the headboard. The pain moved across his face like weather there, and then controlled. "Fine," he said. "Send Cody in." She went to get Cody. She did not let herself smile until she was back in the kitchen. Cody came back from the fence line that afternoon with a list of repairs and a story about a section of creek bank that had washed out worse than Roy had originally reported. He told it to Ethan through the doorway, notebook in hand, reading off the details in his careful, earnest way. Ethan asked 4 sharp questions. Cody answered 3 confidently and admitted he didn't know the answer to the 4th. "That's honest," Ethan said. "Go ask Roy and come back." Cody went. Clara, working at the kitchen table within earshot, said nothing. But she heard the ease come back into Ethan's voice as he worked through the problem, and she thought, there it is. That's what he needs. Not rest from everything. Just rest from the physical. She brought him coffee and a piece of paper and a pencil. He looked at them. "For the fence line plan," she said. "You can draw it out. Roy can work from a diagram." He took the pencil, said nothing for a moment. "You think of everything," he said. "Not warmly, not critically, just as fact." "I try to," she said, and went back to the kitchen. He drew for 2 hours. She could hear the pencil moving in the other room, steady and purposeful. By the time supper was ready and she brought a plate in, he had covered both sides of the paper with a detailed map of the north pasture fence line. Every weak section marked, every repair prioritized, notes written in a hand that was smaller and neater than she would have expected. She set the plate down and looked at it. "This is good," she said. "It's what Thomas needs to manage without me for a few weeks." He said it flatly, like it cost him something to admit the time frame. "Thomas is capable," she said. "I know he is." A pause. "That's not the point." She looked at him. "What is the point?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "This ranch is all I've got," he said. "When something goes wrong on it, I need to be the one dealing with it. I need to know." He looked at the map in his hand. "It's not about whether Thomas can handle it. It's about—" He stopped. "Feeling useful," she said quietly. He looked up at her. Yeah, he said. Not defensive, just honest. She nodded. Then let's make sure you stay useful from this room until you can be useful from a saddle. She tapped the map. This is a start.
That's correct.
On the third day of his recovery, Clara came in at mid-morning with coffee to find him holding a small framed photograph. He set it face down on the bedside table when he heard her, but not quite fast enough. She pretended not to notice. She poured the coffee, set it down, turned to go. Rebecca, he said. She stopped. That's who it is, in the picture. His voice was level, not raw, not controlled. Somewhere in between, the way a voice sounded when a grief had been lived with long enough to become familiar. I don't look at it, I just keep it there. She turned back slowly. Why did you look at it today? He thought about that. Because when I woke up this morning for about 30 seconds, I didn't feel the way I usually feel when I wake up. He paused. And it surprised me. So I looked at the picture too. He stopped. Seemed to hear how it sounded. To remind yourself, she said. To remind myself. He agreed. She stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment. What was she like? She asked. He looked at the back of the frame on the table. She was the loudest person in any room she walked into, he said, and she never noticed. She thought she was quiet. She thought she blended in. Something moved in his face. She did not blend in. Clara almost smiled. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was, he said. He picked up the coffee. She would have reorganized my entire kitchen by now. I did reorganize your kitchen, Clara said. I know, he said. She'd have approved. By the end of the first week of his recovery, the rhythm of the ranch had adjusted around the new reality. Thomas managed the range work. Roy led the hands. Cody rode back and forth between the north pasture and the house 3 times a day, with updates for Ethan, who had migrated from the downstairs room to a chair on the porch once Clara declared his color good enough to risk the outdoor air. He sat on the porch and ran the ranch by voice and by the detailed handwritten notes he sent back with Cody. He made decisions about which sections of fence to repair first, about the 3 new horses Thomas wanted to purchase from a breeder in Grand Junction, about a dispute between 2 of the hands over tool storage that had apparently been simmering for months. He did all of this with the map across his knees and the coffee she kept coming out to refresh. The hands rode past the porch in the morning and tipped their hats and gave him short reports on what they were heading out to do, and he acknowledged each one sometimes with a question, sometimes with a single nod. Clara watched from the kitchen window sometimes. She thought he's good at this. Not just at the work, at the people. He knows which man needs direction and which one needs to be left alone to figure it out. He knows when to speak and when silence is the answer. She thought Rebecca was lucky. And then she caught herself thinking it and turned back to the stove and didn't think it again. It was on a warm Thursday evening, 10 days into his recovery, that Roy Decker came up to the porch with something on his face that wasn't part of the usual end-of-day report. Clara heard it from the kitchen. The door was open against the heat. Something came into town, Roy said. Ryder from Glenwood brought the mail this afternoon. Thomas got it. A pause. There's a letter, addressed to the ranch. Return address is Millhaven. The porch went very quiet. Give it here, Ethan said. She heard the paper, the sound of it being opened. A long silence. Mr. Blackwood, Roy said. Tell Thomas to come up, Ethan said. And tell Miss Whitmore to come out here. Her hands went still on the dish she was drying. She set it down and walked out. Ethan was sitting forward in the chair, the letter in his right hand, his expression so controlled it told her more than any emotion would have. He held the letter out to her. She took it. It was not from the Hargroves directly. It was from their attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch of Millhaven, writing on behalf of the Hargrove family to inform Blackwood Ranch that a warrant had been issued in Millhaven for the arrest of one Clara Whitmore on charges of theft and fraud, that Miss Whitmore was believed to be residing in the area, and that any person harboring a fugitive from lawful warrant could themselves be subject to legal consequence. She read it twice. Her hands did not shake. She handed it back to him. "I'm sorry," she said. "Stop saying that," he said. "Not harsh, quiet. You've got nothing to apologize for. This will cause you problems. Clara." He said her name the way he'd said it that first night after her stitching direct and unadorned. "This is a Millhaven warrant. This county is not Millhaven. I have a lawyer in Denver who will have something to say about the enforceability of that warrant outside the territory of issue." He folded the letter. "And I have more than enough money to make sure he says it loudly." Thomas had arrived by then, and Ethan handed him the letter and told him to send a telegram to Denver in the morning. Thomas read it, said one short word under his breath that Clara chose not to hear, and nodded. "There's something else," Roy said. He had stayed on the porch step, hat in hand. He looked uncomfortable in a way that Roy Decker almost never looked. "The rider who brought the mail. He was asking around in town about the ranch, about whether there was a woman working here." He met Clara's eyes briefly, then looked back at Ethan. "People in town know her. She's been to the general store, the church, twice the post office. It's not exactly a secret." A silence. "Who did he talk to?" Ethan said. "Mrs. Granger at the post office." Roy paused. "You know how she is." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What did she say?" "I don't know exactly. But she's not a woman who keeps things to herself." Clara felt the ground shift under her feet. Not panic. Something older than panic. The familiar grinding dread of watching something you'd built start to come apart at the edges, and knowing there was nothing you could do to stop it, except stand still and wait to see how bad it was going to be. She breathed in slowly. "All right," she said. Both men looked at her. "We knew this was coming eventually. The question is what we do now." She looked at Ethan. "What does your lawyer in Denver need from us?" He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his face, surprise maybe, or the recalibration of a man who had expected fear and gotten strategy instead. "A written account," he said. "What happened in Millhaven, your account in your words, everything." "I can write that tonight," she said. "Clara, I said I can write it tonight." She folded her hands in front of her. "Is there anything else?" He studied her. "No," he said. "That's what we need." She nodded once and went back inside to find paper. She wrote for 3 hours. She wrote everything. The Hargrove household. The years of work, the way young Charles Hargrove had begun to watch her 6 months before everything fell apart, the casual entitlement of him, the way he stood too close, the way he looked at her when he thought no one would notice. She wrote about the night he came to her room. She wrote it plainly, without softening it, because she had promised herself a long time ago that she would not make herself smaller, to make other people more comfortable with what had happened to her. She wrote about Mrs. Hargrove and the jewelry and the maid who lied. She wrote about the boarding house and the 31 miles of road and the gate of Blackwood Ranch. She wrote it all down. Then she sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and read it back to herself, and felt for the first time that it existed outside her body, that it was real in a way it hadn't been while it lived only in her memory. A thing that had happened. A thing with a beginning and an end. A thing that other people could now look at. She folded it, addressed it, left it on the table for Thomas to take to the telegraph office with Ethan's letter in the morning. Then she put her head down on her arms and cried for exactly 5 minutes. Then she stopped, wiped her face, made herself a cup of tea. She was still at the table when she heard the slow step in the hallway. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway in his shirt sleeves, his splinted arm against his side, his hair pushed back like he'd been lying down and not sleeping. He looked at her face. He looked at the folded letter on the table. He said nothing. He crossed to the counter and poured himself a cup from what was left in the pot and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. They sat there in the quiet for a while. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I will be." He nodded. He didn't leave. He sat across from her and drank his cold coffee and looked at the table, and she sat across from him and drank her tea, and neither of them needed anything from the other except for the company, and that was enough, and they both seemed to know it. The Sunday after the letter, she went to church for the first time since the news had spread through town. She knew it had spread. She could tell from the way Cody had been carefully not mentioning it for 4 days, and the way Roy had started riding into town for supplies himself, instead of sending one of the younger hands, and the way Thomas had said very quietly on Saturday morning, "Clara, you might want to wait a week on the church." She went anyway. She wore her better dress, the dark blue one she kept for occasions. She put her hair up properly. She held her head the way her mother had taught her. She walked in and sat in the third pew from the back, which was where she always sat, and she did not look at the faces that turned toward her, and she did not acknowledge the murmuring that moved through the congregation like something contagious. The sermon was from the book of Ruth. She almost laughed. Afterward in the yard, 3 women she had spoken to pleasantly on previous Sundays turned away when she walked past. A man she recognized as a merchant from the main street looked at her for a long moment with an expression that made her feel like something being assessed for damage. And then Margaret Hale Thomas's wife, a round-faced woman with gray-streaked hair and the kind of practical kindness that didn't waste itself on dramatics, appeared at her side and put a hand through her arm. "Pay them no mind," Margaret said quietly. "Half of them have more secrets than you, and twice the cowardice." Clara looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Walk with me to the gate. That'll give them something worth talking about." They walked to the gate together, and Clara held her head up the entire way. She told Ethan about it that evening. He was back on the porch, which had become his regular post during recovery. She sat on the porch step with a glass of water and told him about the church, and the turned-away faces, and the man with the assessing look, and Margaret Hale taking her arm. He listened without interrupting, which she had learned was his way. "Margaret's a good woman," he said when she finished. "She is. The others will come around," he said. "Or they won't, and it won't matter." Clara looked out toward the fence line, the long, late light of summer coming gold through the pasture grass. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "What people are saying about the ranch, about your name being connected to—" "No," he said. Flat and immediate. "Ethan." First time she'd used his given name. She heard herself do it and didn't take it back. He heard it too. He looked at her. "No," he said again. Quieter now, but the same word. "I've spent 15 years building my name in this county by doing the right thing. If some people want to question that, because I stood up for a woman who was lied about, they're not the kind of people whose opinion I ever needed." A pause. "And I've never cared much what people thought of me anyway." She looked at him. "That's not entirely true," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You care what Thomas thinks," she said. "And Roy, and Cody." A beat. "That's different," he said. "Why?" "Because they earned it." He looked at her steadily. "So did you." She turned back to the fence line so he wouldn't see her face. The telegram from Denver came back 4 days later. His lawyer, a man named Arthur Greaves, was direct. The Millhaven warrant had jurisdictional issues that would make enforcement in Colorado territory significantly complicated. He was filing paperwork to challenge it. In the meantime, Ethan should document everything related to Miss Whitmore's employment and his own attestations of her character. The Hargroves were wealthy, Greaves wrote, but they were not untouchable, and there were ways to make the cost of pursuing this higher than the benefit. Clara read the telegram at the kitchen table. She read it twice. "Well," she said. Ethan across the table said, "Arthur's the best lawyer in Denver. If he says there's a way through it, there's a way through it. It's going to cost you." "I know." She looked at him. "You've spent money and influence and your reputation on a woman you hired 6 weeks ago." "About right," he said. "Why?" she said. "And don't tell me it's because I cook well." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she was learning to read, where the absence of words wasn't evasion, but the sound of a man finding the honest thing to say. "Because you walked 31 miles in the Colorado heat," he said, And you stood at my gate and told me the truth when a lie would have been easier, and you've worked every day since like the ranch mattered to you, and you wrote your account last week and cried about it alone in the kitchen at midnight, and then made yourself a cup of tea. He held her gaze. That's not a woman who deserves what happened to her. And I'm not the kind of man who watches injustice run unopposed when I can do something about it. The kitchen was very quiet. How do you know I cried? She said. Your eyes were red when I came in, he said simply. And you'd pushed your chair back so I wouldn't see your face. She stared at him. I was trying to be discreet, she said. You were, he said. You did fine. I just pay attention. She looked down at the telegram in her hands, breathed in once slow. When she looked up, she didn't try to hide what was on her face. Thank you, she said. Not just for this, for all of it. He looked at her for a moment longer than he usually did. You're welcome, he said, and stood and picked up his hat and went back to the porch because that was Ethan Blackwood. He said the thing that needed saying, and then let it be, and never pushed for more than what the moment asked for. She sat at the table and held the telegram and felt something settle in her chest. Something that had been braced and waiting for a long time. Jaje. 3 days later, a woman came to the ranch. Not a rider, not a hand. A woman in a proper dress and a hat with a blue ribbon driving a small buggy down the road from town with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided on a thing and intended to see it through. Clara saw her from the garden and stood up. The woman pulled the buggy to a stop at the gate, stepped down without apparent concern, and came through with the confidence of someone who had been through this gate before. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, straight-backed, with a face that had been handsome once and had traded some of that in exchange for something more durable. She stopped about 10 feet from Clara and looked at her with sharp, direct eyes. You must be the Miss Whitmore everyone's talking about, she said. Clara took off her garden gloves. I am. I'm Helen Graves. Judge Elias Graves was my husband. She paused. He's been gone 4 years. I run the Graves cattle operation now. My south range borders Ethan's north pasture. A beat. I knew Rebecca Blackwood. We were friends for 12 years. Clara held her gaze carefully, trying to read where this was going. Mrs. Graves, she said. I'm not here to cause trouble, Helen said. I'm here because I heard what they're saying in town, and I wanted to look you in the eye. She studied Clara for a moment, the way a woman studied another woman when she was really looking. Harriet Hargrove is the kind of woman who decides what the truth is before she's bothered to learn the facts. I know her type. I've dealt with her type my whole life. She paused. I also know what it looks like when a young woman is telling the truth and nobody wants to hear it. Clara was very still. I knew Charles Hargrove's father, Helen continued. The son is worse than the father, and the father was not a good man. She smoothed her glove over her wrist. I want you to know that not everyone in this county has decided against you. Some of us are watching to see what's right. Something released in Clara's chest, carefully, not all at once. I appreciate that more than I can say, she said. Helen looked past her toward the house. How is Ethan managing that arm? Badly, Clara said. He thinks patience is for other people. Helen's mouth twitched, the first hint of something warm. That sounds exactly right. She looked at Clara again. You're keeping him in line? I'm trying to. Good. Helen reached into her bag and produced a small wrapped parcel. I brought preserved apricots. Rebecca's recipe, actually, she gave it to me years ago. I thought... She paused. Something shifted in her face for just a moment. I thought maybe someone in that kitchen could use it. Clara took the parcel, held it in both hands. Thank you, she said, quietly, meaning it fully. Helen nodded once brisk and turned back toward the buggy. Tell Ethan I'll expect him at the Graves Ranch for supper once that arm is healed, she called over her shoulder. And tell him to bring you. She told Ethan about Helen Graves at supper. He listened with his usual stillness, and when she finished, he said, Helen's a force of nature. She seemed like it. She also didn't have to come, he said. I know. He looked at the preserved apricots she'd set on the table. Rebecca's recipe, he said quietly. Yes. He picked up the jar and looked at it for a moment, set it down. People surprise you, he said, sometimes in the wrong direction, sometimes in the right one. Which direction does today count as? She asked. He thought about it. Actually thought about it. The right one, he said. Definitely the right one. The night it all nearly came apart, she did not see it coming. She should have. She thought afterward that the signs had been there the way Cody had come back from town the day before, with a tight look around his eyes, the way Roy had been riding the fence line extra hours without Ethan asking him, to the way Thomas had sent the younger hands to bed early and then stood at the gate for a long time in the dark. She had noticed all of it and told herself it was just the aftermath of the warrant business. The town unsettled the men protective, the ordinary cautious quiet of people who felt a threat they couldn't name yet. She had been wrong about the can't name yet part. It was well past 10 at night when she heard the horses. Not one horse, more than one. Coming up the road from town, moving fast, the sound of it wrong, in a way that her body understood before her mind did. She was at the window when she heard Ethan's voice on the porch, sharp and low. Thomas. And then Thomas's voice, I see them. She pulled on her boots and went to the door. 4 riders had stopped at the gate. In the torchlight, one of them carried a torch, which was the thing that made her stomach drop. She could see they were not ranch hands, and they were not lawmen. 2 of them she recognized vaguely from town. The other 2 she didn't know. All 4 of them had the loose, heated look of men who had been drinking and had decided on a thing and worked each other up about it the whole ride out. The one in front, big-shouldered with a wide-brimmed hat pushed back from a flushed face, called out toward the porch, Blackwood, we want the woman. Roy came out of the bunkhouse at a dead run, silent and fast. 2 of the other hands were right behind him. Ethan stood on the porch and said nothing. We heard about the warrant, the man said. We're just doing what the law ought to be doing. Hand her over and there's no trouble here. Clara's hand was on the doorframe. She felt her heartbeat in her throat. Her whole body was still the way she'd learned to go still when things got dangerous. Not frozen, not panic, but coiled. Ethan stepped off the porch. He walked to the gate. He was in shirt sleeves, his arms still splinted unarmed as far as she could see, and he walked to that gate the way he walked everywhere. No hurry, no display. Just a man who had decided to be somewhere and was going there. He stopped on his side of the gate and looked at the 4 men. Gentlemen, he said. The word was the calmest she had ever heard him sound, which somehow made it worse. I'm going to tell you this once. The man with the torch shifted in his saddle. This is private land, Ethan said. The woman who works on my ranch is my employee and is under my protection. There is no valid warrant in this county. If you have a legal claim to make, you can make it in front of Judge Holloway in the morning, and Arthur Greaves of Denver will be there to discuss it with you. He paused, just a breath. Or you can ride back to town right now, sleep it off, and we'll all forget this happened. Silence. The man with the torch looked at his companions. Some of the heat went out of his face, replaced by the cooling uncertainty of a man who had expected a different kind of resistance. Roy Decker appeared at Ethan's shoulder. Then Dan and the other hands ranged along the fence. Not threatening, not moving, just present. The man at the front looked at all of them. This ain't over, he said, but the conviction had gone out of it. It is for tonight, Ethan said. The riders turned. Slowly, then faster. The torchlight moved away down the road. The yard was quiet. Clara stepped off the porch. Ethan turned from the gate and saw her standing there, and something moved through his face. Not anger, not relief, something more complicated than either of those things. Go inside, he said. I'm not made of glass, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing they did when the controlled surface of him was working hard. I know that, he said. I know exactly what you're made of. He lowered his voice. But I need you to go inside right now, because if you don't, I'm going to say something or do something that isn't appropriate for a man in my position to say or do. and I'd rather not." She stared at him. The night air between them felt charged with something she had been deliberately not naming for 6 weeks. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood, and her heart doing something complicated and unreasonable, and she listened to the sounds of the yard settling the men talking quietly. Ethan's voice among them, and she thought about what he had just said. Something or do something that isn't appropriate for a man in my position. She sat with that for a long time. When he came in an hour later, she had made coffee. She pushed a cup across the table. He sat down and took it. They didn't talk about the riders. They didn't talk about what he'd said at the gate. They talked about whether the fence repair on the north section would hold through the end of the season, and whether the creek bank washing out would affect the lower pasture water supply, and whether Cody was ready to take on more responsibility with the horses. They talked about ordinary things in ordinary voices, and under the table Clara pressed her hands together so he wouldn't see them shaking. Not from fear, from something else entirely. The morning after the riders came, Ethan was up before anyone. Clara knew because she was up before anyone too, and when she came into the kitchen at 4:30, with her boots still unlaced, he was already at the table with a cup of coffee and a piece of paper covered in his small, precise handwriting. He didn't look up when she came in. She didn't say good morning. She went to the stove and started the fire and put the kettle on and unlaced and relaced her boots properly, and neither of them mentioned the night before. But the night before was in the room with them. She could feel it, the way you could feel a change in the weather before the clouds arrived. "I'm sending 2 men to town today," he said without looking up from the paper. "All right," she said. "I want to know who those riders were, the 2 I didn't recognize." "Roy might know them. Roy's already up. I talked to him at 4. He set down the pen, picked up his coffee. "The one in front was Frank Liddell. He runs cattle south of town, barely solvent drinks more than he works. The other 3 are men who follow him because they don't have enough sense to lead themselves." He looked at the paper. "The question is, who sent them?" Clara turned from the stove. "You think someone sent them? Men like Liddell don't ride out to a working ranch after dark on their own initiative," he said. "They need a reason, and they need someone to light the match." He finally looked at her. "Someone in town knows more about your situation than they should. Either they've been in contact with Millhaven directly, or someone passed through recently with information." She thought about that. "The rider who talked to Mrs. Granger," she said. "That's what I think too." He folded the paper. "I'm going to find out." She poured her tea and sat across from him. The kitchen was dark, still the gray pre-dawn light just beginning at the window. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "I don't want you making enemies for my sake," she said. "I don't make enemies," he said. "I have disagreements. There's a difference." "That's a very fine line. I'm a man who can walk a fine line." He tucked the paper into his shirt pocket. "Eat something before the hands come in. You didn't eat last night." She stared at him. "You noticed that," she said. "I notice most things," he said, and carried his cup to the counter and walked out. See, Roy came back from town before noon. Clara was in the garden when she heard his horse, and she came in through the back door to find Roy at the kitchen table with his hat on the wood in front of him, and Ethan standing across from him with the still tight expression she had learned to read as controlled anger. She stopped in the doorway. "Go ahead," Ethan said to Roy. "Say it again." Roy glanced at her, then back to Ethan. "There was a man in town 3 days ago, came from Millhaven. Didn't stay at the hotel, stayed with Ed Carver over on the South Road." He paused. "Carver's been doing business with the Hargroves for years, buying cattle from them at below market prices. People know it, nobody talks about it." "Who is the man?" Ethan said. "His name is Whitmore," Roy said. Clara felt the word hit her like cold water thrown from a bucket. Her hand found the doorframe. Roy was looking at her now, his face carrying something she had never seen on Roy Decker's face before. Something like genuine worry. "Daniel Whitmore," he said. "Told Carver he was looking for his wife." The kitchen went absolutely silent. "I'm not his wife," Clara said. Her voice came out steady. She was aware that was remarkable and didn't examine it. "I know," Roy said. "He told people in town I was his wife." "His runaway wife," Roy said. "The story he's telling is that you left without warning, that you'd been unwell, that he's worried for you." He pressed his lips together. "He's telling it with a lot of concern in his voice from what I hear. Very convincing." She gripped the doorframe. Daniel Whitmore was not her husband. He was the man she had been promised to at 17 by a father who owed him money and thought a daughter was a reasonable currency for debt. She had spent 8 months in his house before she understood what kind of man he was, not loudly cruel, not obviously violent, but the kind of man who controlled everything around him so thoroughly that the people in his orbit stopped knowing where his will ended and their own began. She had left in the middle of the night with her mother's ring and $14 and the clothes on her back. That had been 4 years ago. She had spent 4 years making sure he couldn't find her. "How long has he been in town?" she said. 3 days that we know of," Roy said. "Could be longer." She looked at Ethan. He was looking at her with the same expression he'd had at the gate the night before. That complicated thing she couldn't fully name, but underneath it now, something sharper and colder. "Your real name isn't Whitmore," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a man finding solid ground. "It was my father's name," she said. "He gave it to Daniel in the same transaction he gave him me." Her voice was flat and precise, each word placed like a stone. "I kept the name when I left because I had nothing else to identify myself with. I've been Clara Whitmore for 4 years, because it was easier than explaining." A silence. "What's your name?" he said. She looked at him. "Clara Beaumont." He said it once quietly to himself, like he was placing it somewhere safe. "All right," he said. "Roy, tell Thomas I want to talk to Arthur Greaves directly. Send a telegram today, not a letter. I want him on a train from Denver if he can manage it." Roy nodded and stood. "And Roy." Ethan's voice stopped him at the door. "Nobody on this ranch says the name Whitmore in connection with Clara again. As far as this ranch is concerned, it never applied." Roy looked at Clara. He tipped his hat to her, a small gesture, enormous in context. Then he left. She should have told him. She knew it before he said anything, and he didn't say anything, which was almost worse. He gave her the rest of the morning and the noon meal and the early afternoon, and she moved through all of it with the controlled, focused energy of someone who was not going to fall apart, and everyone around her seemed to understand that and gave her room. It was mid-afternoon when she went to find him. He was on the porch with the fence line map, same as always, but the map was face down on the railing, and he was looking at the road. She came out and sat on the step. "I should have told you," she said. "Yes," he said, not angry, just honest. "I was afraid if I told you the whole story you wouldn't let me stay." "You were afraid of a lot of things when you got here," he said. "Most of them made sense given what you'd been through." "That's not an excuse." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at her hands. "Daniel Whitmore is not a man who does things loudly. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't shout. He makes himself seem reasonable and concerned and patient, and then the people around you start to think you're the problem, and eventually you start to think it too." She paused. "I left because I was afraid that if I stayed 1 more year, I wouldn't know my own mind anymore." The silence stretched. "Did he hurt you?" Ethan asked. Quiet and direct the way he asked everything. She thought about how to answer that. Not the way people usually mean when they ask that question. But there are more ways to hurt a person than the obvious ones. He nodded slowly. She had the sense he understood that from somewhere inside his own experience, though she didn't ask. "He's been looking for me for 4 years, she said. "I've been careful. I've moved twice. I've never used my real name in a place where I thought the information could travel back." She stopped. "I don't know how he found me here." "Mrs. Granger," Ethan said. She looked up. "She would have described you in detail to the writer from Millhaven," he said. And Daniel Whitmore had 4 years to spread your description across every county that borders Millhaven. Eventually, someone saw something that fit. He paused. It's not because you were careless. It's because he had more resources and more time. She felt the truth of that settle over her. Not comfort exactly, but something cleaner than the guilt she'd been carrying all afternoon. What do I do? She said, not weak, asking a genuine question of someone she had come to trust. Arthur Greaves gets here, he said. We lay out everything. The original arrangement your father made, which depending on how it was formalized, may have legal standing that we can challenge. The circumstances of your departure, the Hargrove situation, all of it together. He turned to look at her directly. Daniel Whitmore has been building a story that paints him as the victim. We build a different story, a true one, and we build it on paper with a lawyer's name on it, and we make sure it gets in front of the right people before his story does. She looked at him. You're not afraid of him, she said. No, he said simply. You should be a little. He's smart, and he's patient, and he has money. So do I, Ethan said. And I have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth on my side, he said. And Arthur Greaves. She almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her enough that the actual version slipped out just briefly, not entirely steady. Ethan looked at her like that surprised him too. There it is, he said softly. She looked at him. He looked away first. Arthur Greaves arrived on the Thursday stage. He was a short, wiry man of about 50 with wire-rimmed spectacles and a coat that had seen better decades, and the rapid economic movements of someone whose time was worth more than he usually charged. He shook Ethan's hand without ceremony and looked at Clara over his spectacles with the assessing gaze of a man who had spent his professional life determining what was true. Miss Beaumont, he said. She startled at her own name, then straightened. Mr. Greaves. I've read Ethan's account. I'd like to hear yours. He pulled out a notebook. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out because you think it's embarrassing or unlikely, or because you think I'll judge you. I don't judge. I build cases. She told him everything. She told it the way she had written it plainly without softening in the order it happened. She told him about her father and Daniel Whitmore and the arrangement. She told him about the months in Whitmore's house. She told him about leaving. She told him about Millhaven and the Hargroves and Charles and the jewelry and the warrant. Greaves wrote the whole time. Occasionally he asked a question, always precise and brief. He never reacted to any of it. When she finished, he sat back and looked at his notes. The arrangement between your father and Whitmore, he said. Was there a document? I don't know. My father didn't tell me the details. Do you know if your father is still alive? I don't know. We'll need to find out. If the arrangement was formalized and your father is alive, there may be ways to approach this through him. He tapped his pen against the notebook. The more important issue right now is the Millhaven warrant. I've already filed the jurisdictional challenge, but Whitmore's presence in this county changes the calculus. He can try to get a local judge to issue an order that sidesteps the jurisdictional issue entirely. He looked at Ethan. Who is the judge in this county? Samuel Holloway, Ethan said. Do you know him well? He's had supper at this table, Ethan said. Greaves nodded once satisfied. Then I want a meeting with him this week. Informal first. We get in front of this before Whitmore does. I can arrange that, Ethan said. Good. Greaves looked at Clara again. Miss Beaumont, is there anyone in this county who can attest to your character besides Ethan and his employees? She thought. Helen Graves, she said. She came to the ranch 2 weeks ago. Helen Graves, Greaves repeated. Judge Elias Graves's widow. Yes. Something moved in his face. Approval, maybe, or the quiet recognition of a lawyer who understood which names carried weight in which rooms. Even better, he said. Greaves met with Judge Holloway on Saturday morning. Clara did not go. Ethan went and took Thomas with him, and she stayed at the ranch and cooked a meal she barely tasted and tried not to listen for the sound of horses every 5 minutes. Cody kept finding reasons to be near the house. She didn't say anything about it. She was glad for it. They came back in the early afternoon. Ethan walked through the back door first, and she looked at his face before he said a word, and what she saw there was not victory, but something steadier than that. Relief with a backbone. "Holloway won't issue an order in support of the Millhaven warrant," he said. "He says the jurisdictional issues Greaves raised are significant enough that he won't put his name on something that likely won't survive appeal." She exhaled. "But," Ethan said, "Whitmore can still operate in town. He can still talk to people. He can still work whatever angle he's been working, and he's been working it for a week now while we were figuring out he was here." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Greaves wants to approach Whitmore directly. Give him a legal document laying out our counterposition. Make it clear that pursuing this will be expensive and unlikely to succeed." "And if he doesn't stop," she said. "Then we take it to the territorial commissioner in Denver," he said, "with Helen Graves's name attached, and Greaves's filing, and Holloway's refusal to issue an order. It builds a record." He paused. "It takes time. I won't pretend it doesn't." She sat down across from him. "He won't stop," she said. "You need to know that about him. He doesn't let things go. It's not about the money or the arrangement anymore. It's about the fact that I left." She looked at the table. "Men like him don't accept that they can lose something." Ethan was quiet. "Let him not accept it," he said finally. "He's going to have to learn." Daniel Whitmore came to the ranch on a Tuesday. He didn't come with riders. He didn't come at night. He came at 11 in the morning on a clear summer day, alone in a good coat on a well-kept horse, and he came through the front gate like a man who had every right to be there. Clara was in the cookhouse when Cody came to the door, with his face stripped of its usual easy expression. "There's a man at the house," he said, "asking for you." She knew before she asked. "What does he look like?" Cody described him. 45, medium height, dark coat. Very still the way Cody said it, like he was describing something he found unsettling. She untied her apron. "Is Mr. Blackwood at the house?" she asked. "He was on the porch when I left." She walked out. She heard Daniel's voice before she saw him. He was talking to Ethan, standing at the base of the porch steps, with his hat in his hands and the carefully arranged expression of a reasonable man, and his voice was low and warm and measured, and even from 20 yards away, she felt the old familiar pull of it. Not attraction, never that, but the disorientation of a voice designed to make you question your own perception. She stopped walking. She made herself breathe. She made herself remember what she knew, what she had written down on that paper at midnight, what she had told Arthur Greaves without flinching. She walked forward. Ethan saw her coming. Something moved through his face there and gone. Not worry, she decided. Steadiness. The look of a man who had positioned himself and was not moving. Daniel turned. He looked at her the way she remembered, like she was something that had wandered away from where it belonged and had now been collected. "Clara," he said, warm, relieved. A man who had been searching for something precious and found it. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was flat. She was glad of that. "I've been so worried about you," he said. He took a small step toward her. She did not take a step back. "When you left, Clara, I've been searching for 4 years. I just want to know you're safe." "I'm safe," she said. "I can see that." He looked briefly at Ethan at the house at the ranch around them. Something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, she knew it, like she knew her own name before the warm mask resettled. "I'd like to talk to you alone, just for a few minutes." "No," she said. A pause. "Clara." "No," she said again. Same word, same voice. "Anything you want to say to me, you can say here." Something shifted in his face then. Just for a moment. Not anger, he was too controlled for anger to show, too practiced at packaging himself correctly. But something underneath the warmth. The thing she had learned to see in the months she'd lived in his house. The thing that had told her she needed to leave. "That's not very reasonable," he said. "I'm not interested in your definition of reasonable," she said. He looked at Ethan again, Longer this time. "I don't know what you've told this man about me," he said still to Clara, still in the warm voice. "But I want you to know, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because you're my responsibility, and I care about what happens to you." "She's not your responsibility," Ethan said. Daniel looked at him directly for the first time. It was the kind of look a man used when he was deciding whether another man was an obstacle or an inconvenience. "I don't believe I was speaking to you," he said politely. "You're standing on my land," Ethan said. "You came through my gate. That makes you my business." He came down one step of the porch. "And the woman you're speaking to is my employee, which means her well-being is my responsibility, not yours." Daniel smiled. The smile was patient and polite and didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you think you're doing the right thing," he said to Ethan. "She's a very convincing woman. But there are legal arrangements that predate her arrival here, and those arrangements—" "Arthur Greaves has read your legal arrangements," Ethan said. "He has some thoughts about them that you might want to hear before you continue this conversation." For the first time, something real passed through Daniel Whitmore's face. Not fear, something adjacent to it. The recognition of a man who had expected a simpler obstacle. "Greaves," he said. "Denver," Ethan said. "He's been here since Thursday." Daniel looked at Clara, and she looked back at him, and she did the thing she had not been able to do for 4 years. The thing she had not been able to do in 8 months in his house. The thing that had seemed impossible for so long. She had stopped believing she was capable of it. She held his eyes and did not look away first. "There's nothing for you here," she said. "I left. I'm not coming back. Whatever arrangement my father made, I wasn't property then, and I'm not property now, and you can spend as much money as you like trying to change that, but it won't change." A long silence. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he put his hat back on slowly, the deliberate movement of a man deciding to leave on his own terms. "This isn't over, Clara," he said. "Yes, it is," she said. He turned his horse and rode back through the gate. Clara stood in the yard and watched him go, and did not move until the sound of the hooves had faded completely down the road. Then she turned around, and Ethan was right behind her, close enough that she hadn't heard him come down the rest of the porch steps, and she stopped. He looked at her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. It wasn't entirely true. Her hands were shaking. She could feel them shaking, and something in her chest was doing something loud and unsteady. But she was upright, and she had said what she needed to say, and she had not looked away, and that felt like yes enough. "Clara." She looked up at him. "You did that," he said. "Not me, not Greaves." He held her gaze. "You." She breathed in. "I know," she said. But Daniel Whitmore had not come to the ranch just to talk. They found that out 2 days later when Cody came back from the feed store in town and pulled Ethan aside before supper with a look on his face that said the news was bad and he was trying to decide how bad. Clara was in the kitchen. She heard the low voices. She came to the doorway. "Tell me," Ethan said to Cody. Cody looked at Clara, then back at Ethan. "He filed something," he said. "Whitmore, with the county clerk's office, yesterday morning before we were up." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Ed Carver's brother is a clerk there. He told Billy Foss, who told Roy, who sent me to find you." Ethan took the paper. Clara crossed the room and stood at his shoulder and read it with him. It was a property claim. Daniel Whitmore had filed a legal claim against Blackwood Ranch, alleging that Clara Beaumont, her real name used correctly and deliberately, had entered the employ of Ethan Blackwood under false pretenses that she had stolen personal property from the Whitmore household prior to her departure, that said property included items of significant value, and that he was claiming right of recovery not only of the property, but of a financial bond that he alleged existed between her father's estate and his own, a bond that he was now attaching to Blackwood Ranch as the entity harboring the individual in question. It was detailed. It was precise. It was the work of a lawyer, not a man acting alone. He had come to the ranch not to reason with her. He had come to look at the property, to see what he could touch. Ethan set the paper down very carefully on the kitchen table. Clara looked at it. "He planned this," she said. "Before he ever rode out here. He came here to see the ranch, and then he filed this." "Yes," Ethan said. "He's not trying to get me back," she said, understanding moving through her like cold water. "He doesn't care about me. He never did. He's trying to cost you enough that you'll make me leave." Ethan picked up the paper again. His face was entirely unnervingly calm. "Thomas," he called. Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Send a rider to Arthur Greaves tonight," Ethan said. "Tell him what's been filed. Tell him I want him at the county clerk's office when it opens tomorrow morning." "Done," Thomas said. "And Thomas," Ethan's voice didn't change, "send word to Helen Graves. Tell her what's happened. Ask if she'd be willing to put her name to an affidavit regarding Clara's character and the events since her arrival." Thomas nodded and left. Clara was still looking at the paper. "He's going to hurt you," she said quietly. "Your finances, your reputation, your time. He's going to tie this up and make it cost you." "I know that," Ethan said. "Then why are you—" She stopped. He looked at her. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because you didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going to let a man with money and no conscience punish you for surviving him." She stared at him. "And because—" He stopped. He looked at the table. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down again. He was not a man who stumbled over words, and watching him do it now made her chest tighten. "Ethan," she said. "Because this ranch is different since you came," he said. "Everything here is different. The food and the garden and the way the men talk to each other and the way I—" He stopped again. "I wake up in the morning and it doesn't feel like nothing anymore." He set it to the table. Then he made himself look at her. "That matters to me. You matter to me. And I'm not going to hand you over to a man who will take everything you've built back into yourself and reduce it to nothing again." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara felt something in her chest break open the way ice broke in spring, not shattering, but releasing. The slow, irreversible movement of something that had been frozen, beginning to thaw. "You can't say something like that and then just drink coffee," she said. Something moved in his face. "I'm not drinking coffee." "You're holding the cup." He set it down. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them moved, and the whole weight of 8 weeks and 31 miles and 4 years, and everything she had survived, and everything he had held on to through 5 years of nothing pressed down around both of them. She took one step toward him. He closed the rest of the distance. His good arm came around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder, and the shaking she'd been holding in since Tuesday, since before Tuesday, since the gate, since the letter, since Roy came back from town and said the name Whitmore, with that look on his face, all of it came loose at once. She didn't cry. She just shook, and he stood there and held her like he intended to be standing there for a long time, and she let him, and that was the most frightening and most necessary thing she had done in 4 years. He said nothing. He didn't try to fix it, or minimize it, or narrate it. He just stood there in the kitchen with his broken arm held careful, and his good arm around her shoulders, and let her shake. After a while she pulled back. She looked at his shirt. She smoothed the front of it, which was a ridiculous thing to do, and she knew it. "Arthur Greaves is going to need to work harder than he thought," she said. "Arthur Greaves likes a challenge," Ethan said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her for weeks, the thing she had been deliberately not naming. Only now there was no distance in it. "Clara," he said, her real name, the one she'd been afraid to use, the one he'd said once to himself in the kitchen that first day, quietly, like placing something in a safe location. "I know," she said. "I need to say it properly." "I know," she said again, "but not tonight." She stepped back, not away, just to where she could breathe. "Tonight we need to figure out what Whitmore has done to your property claim and how Greaves is going to fight it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're a practical woman," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am." "I knew that about you when you walked through the gate," he said. I knew it from the first sentence you said to me." She pulled the property claim across the table and read it again this time, looking for the specific legal language. "Can Greaves challenge the bond claim?" she asked. "The one he says exists between his estate and my father's?" "Yes," Ethan said, sitting down across from her, the two of them falling back into the working rhythm as naturally as breathing. "But we need to know if there was an actual document, which means we need to find your father. I haven't spoken to my father in 4 years." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "Do you know where he is?" She thought about that. She thought about the man who had handed her across a table to clear a debt the way you handed across a deed or a horse. She thought about the fact that he was still her father. "Missouri," she said. "Last I knew." Ethan nodded. "I'll send a wire." She looked at the document in her hands. All of Daniel Whitmore's careful, patient malice reduced to legal language on county clerk's paper. "He thought this would make you give up," she said. "He thought you'd look at this and decide I wasn't worth the trouble." "I know what he thought," Ethan said. She looked across the table at him. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met," she said. "You've been warned about that," he said. She almost smiled. Then the weight of the document in her hands came back, and the smile didn't complete itself. "What if Greaves can't stop it?" she said. "What if Whitmore has enough legal ground that this actually touches the ranch?" Ethan reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Just for a moment. His palm against the back of her hand, warm and certain. "Then we deal with it," he said. "Together. Same as I told you from the beginning." She turned her hand over under his. Outside, the summer dark had come down full, and the stars were out over the Colorado mountains, and somewhere up on the North Ridge, a coyote called once and went quiet. The ranch settled into its nighttime sounds around them, the horses shifting in the barn, the distant voice of one of the hands, the low steady hum of a living place. She had walked 31 miles to find a gate and ask a man she didn't know for a chance. She had not known that morning at the gate that what she was walking toward was this kitchen table, this man's hand on hers, this particular hard-won version of safe. "Together," she said. And she meant it the way she meant everything now fully with her whole self, having learned the hard way what it cost to mean something less. Arthur Greaves was at the county clerk's office when it opened at 8 the next morning. Clara knew because Thomas told her, and Thomas knew because he had ridden into town himself at 7:30 to make sure Greaves had everything he needed. She was at the stove when Thomas came back through the door, and she looked at his face before she asked anything because she had learned that Thomas Hale's face was the most reliable instrument on the ranch for measuring how bad things actually were. His face said bad, but not as bad as it could be. "Greaves read the whole filing," Thomas said, pulling off his gloves. "He says Whitmore's lawyer is good. Not Denver good, but good enough to have made the claim technically sound on its face." "On its face," Ethan said. He was at the table. He hadn't slept much. Clara could tell because the lines around his eyes were deeper than usual, and he was on his 3rd cup of coffee. "On its face," Thomas repeated. "Greaves says the bond claim is the real problem. If there's a legal document between Whitmore and Clara's father, and if that document can be read as attaching to her person as a transferable debt instrument." He stopped, looked at Clara. "Greaves used a lot of legal language. That's the plain version." "Can he challenge it?" Clara asked. "He already filed a response this morning, 3 pages. He told me to tell you he's seen worse and won worse." Thomas set his gloves on the counter. "But he needs the document, or proof that no document exists. And he needs it fast because Whitmore's lawyer is going to push for a hearing within the week." "A week?" Clara looked at Ethan. "The wire to Missouri," she said. "Sent last night," he said. "We wait." Waiting was the hardest thing she had ever been asked to do, and she had been asked to do a great many hard things. She kept working. That was the only thing she knew how to do when the ground shifted. Keep her hands busy, keep the rhythm, keep the people around her fed and functional. She cooked 3 meals a day, with the focus of a woman who understood that useful things were the only things standing between her and the particular terror of helplessness. The hands felt it. She could tell not that they were afraid, but that they were present in a different way. Roy found extra work to do near the house. Cody appeared in the kitchen doorway 4 times a day, with small offers of help he'd never have thought to make 3 weeks ago. Even Dan, the quietest of the hands, started leaving firewood stacked by the cookhouse door without being asked. They were circling her. Not out of pity, out of something that felt in its rough and unsentimental way like loyalty. On the second day of waiting, Helen Graves came back. She didn't send word ahead. She came through the gate with the same brisk purpose as the first time and found Clara in the garden and sat herself down on the low stone wall without being invited, which Clara had come to understand was simply how Helen Graves operated in the world. "I heard about the filing," Helen said. "News travels fast. In this county, it travels faster than fast." Helen looked at the garden at the plants Clara had brought back from nothing. "I've already spoken to Arthur Greaves. I told him I'll put my name to anything he needs." Clara looked at her. "Helen, don't," Helen said, not unkindly. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because Daniel Whitmore is exactly the kind of man I've spent my entire adult life watching operate, and I am extremely tired of watching men like that win." A pause. "All right," Clara said. "Also," Helen said, "I'm doing it for you." She smoothed her skirt over her knee. "Don't argue with me. I'm 62 years old, and I've earned the right to contradict myself." Clara sat down on the wall beside her. "Do you think Greaves can stop it?" she asked. Helen was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone avoiding the question. The quiet of someone giving it its proper weight. "I think Greaves is very good," she said. "And I think Ethan Blackwood is one of the most stubborn human beings God ever put on this earth, which in this particular situation is an asset." She paused. "And I think you are not the same woman who walked through that gate 2 months ago, and that matters too." Clara thought about that. "I don't feel that different," she said. "That's because you're inside it," Helen said. "From out here, the difference is obvious." She looked at Clara directly. "When I came the first time, you were still braced, still waiting for something to knock you down. Now you're standing like someone who's decided to stop waiting for the blow and start thinking about what comes after." Clara turned that over. "Is that what I look like?" she said. "That's what you look like," Helen said. The wire from Missouri came on the 3rd day. Thomas brought it from town in the early afternoon, and she was in the kitchen when he came in and set it on the table without a word. She looked at the envelope. Her name, her real name, Clara Beaumont, written in the neat hand of the telegraph office clerk. Ethan came in from the yard. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. "You want privacy," he said. "No," she said. "Stay." She opened it. Her father's handwriting. She recognized it immediately. Angular and cramped and slightly tilted to the left. The same hand that had signed the report cards she'd brought home from school. The same hand that had written her mother's name in the family Bible. The wire was short. Telegraph brevity, every word chosen for cost. "Received your message. Stop. Know what you are asking. Stop. No document exists. Stop. Your arrangement was verbal. Only. Stop. Whitmore has no legal paper. Stop. I am sorry. Clara. Stop. Truly sorry. Stop. If you need me to say so to a judge, I will come. Stop. Just ask. Stop your father." She read it twice. She set it down on the table. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "No document," Ethan said, reading over her shoulder. "Verbal only," she said, "which means Whitmore filed that bond claim knowing there was no paper behind it. He invented the document." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "He gambled that you didn't know, that you'd never contact your father, that the threat of a legal document would be enough to make this too costly to fight." "He almost won that bet," she said. "Almost," Ethan said. She picked up the wire again. Read the last part again. "I am sorry, Clara. Truly sorry. If you need me to say so to a judge, I will come. 4 years. 4 years of silence and distance, and the low-grade grief of a daughter who had been handed across a table like a debt receipt. And now 6 lines on telegraph paper. It was not enough. She was clear about that inside herself. It was nowhere near enough. But it was something, and right now it was exactly what she needed. I need Greaves to have this today, she said. I'll write it in myself, Ethan said. He had the wire in his hand and his hat off the hook before she could respond. Your arm is better than it was. He put his hat on. I'll be back before dark. She looked at him. Ethan, she said. He paused at the door. Thank you, she said. For the wire, for staying, for all of it. He looked at her for just a moment, that look the one she had stopped pretending not to recognize. Don't thank me, he said. Just have supper ready. And he was gone. Greaves was at the table when Ethan came back, which told her that Ethan had brought him along from town and hadn't mentioned it. She put 2 extra plates down without comment and listened while Greaves talked. This changes everything, Greaves said. He set the wire on the table and tapped it. If the bond claim has no document behind it, Whitmore's lawyer filed a fraudulent claim with the county clerk. That's not a civil matter. That's potentially criminal. Potentially, Ethan said. Depends on how well his lawyer can argue ignorance. Greaves took off his spectacles and cleaned them, which Clara had learned he did when he was thinking hard. But here's what it does for us regardless of the criminal question. It destroys the foundation of his entire filing. Every claim in that document rests on the bond claim. If the bond claim is fraudulent, the rest of it collapses. The Millhaven warrant, Clara asked, separate issue. But a fraudulent filing here significantly damages his credibility in that jurisdiction as well. Greaves put his spectacles back on. I need your father's affidavit, not just a telegraph wire. If he's willing to come. He said he would, Clara said. Then I need him here within the week if possible. He looked at Clara steadily. I want to be very clear with you, Miss Beaumont. This is good. This is very good. But Whitmore is not going to accept this quietly. He is going to push back, and his next move is likely to be something we haven't anticipated, because men like him do not make clean retreats. She nodded. I know, she said. I lived with him for 8 months. I know exactly how he moves when he's cornered. Tell me, Greaves said, and opened his notebook. She told him everything she knew about how Daniel Whitmore operated under pressure, not with rage, but with a slow, methodical rearrangement of reality, shifting the story, finding the seam in an opponent's position and pressing on it until something gave. She told Greaves about the tenant farmer, whose lease he had voided by manufacturing a breach of terms that didn't exist. She told him about the business partner he had driven out by creating a paper trail that looked from outside like embezzlement. She told him about the patience of it, the way he was willing to wait years for the right moment. Greaves listened and wrote and occasionally asked a sharp question. When she finished, he sat back and looked at his notes, and then at her. You're a very clear thinker, he said. I had to learn to be, she said. It shows. He closed the notebook. I think I know what his next move is. What? Ethan said. He's going to try to get to your father before we do, Greaves said to Clara. He knows we sent the wire. He knows your father answered. If he can get to Missouri first and apply enough pressure money threats, whatever he has on the man, he can potentially get your father to recant. Clara's stomach dropped. My father owes him money, she said. The original debt. If Whitmore offers to forgive the debt in exchange for... Yes, Greaves said. That's the seam. She looked at Ethan. He was already looking at her. I need to send another wire, she said. To my father. Tonight. He needs to understand what Whitmore might offer him and why he can't accept it. Write it, Ethan said. He pushed paper across the table. She wrote it there at the supper table with Greaves watching, and Ethan across from her, and the remains of the meal pushed aside. She wrote it carefully because every word cost money, and she needed each one to land. Father. Stop. Whitmore will come to you, or send someone. Stop. He will offer to clear your debt. Stop. Do not accept. Stop. He is filing fraudulent claims, and your testimony will expose them. Stop. This will end him. Stop. I need you to be brave. Stop. Please stop. Clara. She slid it across to Ethan. He read it, said nothing, handed it to Thomas to take to town. Whitmore's next move came sooner than any of them expected. Not to Missouri, not to her father. He came to Helen Graves. Helen sent word the following morning, a note carried by her ranch foreman, 2 sentences characteristically direct. Whitmore came to my house last evening. Come when you can. Clara and Ethan rode out together. His arm was out of the full splint, now more functional, though she still watched how he held it. Helen met them in her front parlor with tea already poured, and the expression of a woman who had spent the night deciding exactly what to say. He came at 7 o'clock, Helen said. Alone. Very polite. She set down her cup. He spent 15 minutes telling me what a troubled young woman you are, Clara. How your history was one of instability, false accusations running from consequences. Very concerned tone. She looked at Clara directly. He wanted me to withdraw my affidavit. What did you tell him? Clara said. I told him I didn't believe a word he'd said, that I had met you and made my own judgment, and that if he wanted to continue arguing the point, he could do it in front of Judge Holloway. She paused. Then I told him to leave my house. Ethan said, did he go? Eventually. Something crossed Helen's face. Before he left, he said something that I want you both to hear. She set down her cup carefully. He said that Ethan Blackwood was a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him once, and that it would be a shame if it happened again. The parlor went very quiet. Ethan's expression didn't change, but Clara felt the words land, felt what they were meant to do. Not threaten property, not threaten law, but press on the exact place where Ethan was most vulnerable, where Rebecca lived. He researched you, Clara said to Ethan. He knows about Rebecca. He asked around town, Helen confirmed. He was asking about Rebecca before he ever came to the ranch. Clara looked at Ethan. He was looking at the wall behind Helen's head. His jaw was set. She could see the pulse in his throat. Ethan, she said quietly. He looked at her. She held his gaze and put everything she had into it, everything she knew about him, and everything she felt, and everything she had decided in the kitchen the night he told her this ranch was different with her in it. He breathed out. He's trying to make me react, Ethan said. Yes, she said. Don't. He looked at her for another moment. Right, he said. He turned to Helen. Thank you for sending word, and thank you for what you said to him. Don't thank me, Helen said. Just win. The hearing was set for Friday. Greaves worked through Wednesday and Thursday without stopping. Clara could hear him through the walls of the guest room in the evenings, the scratch of his pen, the occasional murmur of him reading something aloud to test how it sounded. She brought him food he barely touched, and coffee he drank mechanically, and didn't say anything about the rest, because she understood what it looked like when a person was in the full current of work that mattered. On Thursday evening, Ethan knocked on the guest room door. Greaves opened it. How are we standing? Ethan said. Better than I expected, Greaves said. He stepped back and let them both in, and spread his papers on the bed, because there was no desk. The telegraph wire from your father arrives Friday morning at 9. The hearing is at 10. If it's delayed, we're working without it, which is manageable, but not ideal. He pointed to a stack of papers. Helen Graves's affidavit, my challenge to the bond claim with the supporting argument, a letter from Judge Holloway confirming his refusal to honor the Millhaven warrant. And he picked up a separate sheet. A letter I sent to the Territorial Commissioner's office in Denver 2 days ago, informing them that a fraudulent property claim may have been filed in this county against a documented landowner. You went to Denver, Ethan said. I wrote to Denver, Greaves said. There's a difference. But the Territorial Commissioner's Office does not like fraudulent filings. It makes the territory look bad to the federal government, and they are currently in discussions about statehood. I made that point clearly. He looked over his spectacles. It means there are eyes on this hearing that go beyond Judge Holloway. Clara stared at him. You built a case in 4 days, she said. I built a case in 4 days, he agreed. You gave me the raw material. Your account, the wire, Helen Graves and Ethan's records of your employment and character. I just arranged it. He sat down on the edge of the bed. There's one more thing. I found through a contact in Millhaven that Charles Hargrove is not the first person to make an accusation against a female employee. There was another woman 2 years before you. Her name was Mary Sutton. She left town rather than fight it, same as you tried to do. He paused. She's in Denver now. I sent a wire. She's willing to make a statement. The room went very still. Clara put her hand on the doorframe. She'll testify, she said. In writing, Greaves said. That's enough for what we need. He looked at Clara with the direct, unsentimental gaze she had come to deeply appreciate. You were not there first, Miss Beaumont, and the fact that you're willing to stand and fight means you might be there last. She could not speak for a moment. Ethan's hand found the small of her back, just briefly, just there, and then gone, but she felt it. Friday, he said to Greaves. Friday, Greaves confirmed. Get some sleep, both of you. She could not sleep. She lay in her room and listened to the ranch settle into the deep quiet of after midnight, and thought about Friday and her father and Mary Sutton in Denver and the $14 she had left with 4 years ago and the 31 miles of road. She thought about Ethan telling her this ranch was different since she came. She thought about his hand on hers across the kitchen table. She thought about what Helen had said. You're standing like someone who's decided to stop waiting for the blow and start thinking about what comes after. At 2 a.m, she got up and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. She heard the step in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway in his shirt and suspenders, with his hair pushed back and his eyes carrying the same weight hers probably did. You can't sleep either, she said. No. He pulled out a chair. She made 2 cups and brought them to the table and sat across from him. Same as always, same positions, same kitchen, and yet nothing about it felt the same as it had 2 months ago. Are you scared? He said. She thought about lying. Yes, she said. You? Yes, he said. Simple and direct, the way he was everything. But not about the hearing. She looked at him. I'm scared about what comes after, he said. Win or lose, tomorrow it ends. The Whitmore problem, the warrant, all of it. It ends one way or another in that courtroom. And then... He turned his cup in his hands. I've been so focused on the fight that I haven't let myself think past it. What are you thinking about it now? She said. He looked at her across the table. The kitchen was dark except for the lamp between them, and in that light his face was very plain and very honest. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as an employee, as... He stopped, tried again. Clara, you know what I'm trying to say. Say it anyway, she said. He held her gaze. I want you to stay because this is your home now too. Because the garden is yours and the kitchen is yours, and the people on this ranch are yours and I am... A pause. The longest she had ever waited through. I am yours if you want me. The kettle was quiet. The lamp held steady. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. I walked 31 miles to get here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic man, but the careful control of it eased in a way she hadn't seen before. He turned his hand over under hers and held on. They sat like that for a long time. Friday morning came fast and clear. The telegraph office opened at 8 and the wire from her father was waiting. Thomas picked it up and wrote it back and handed it to Greaves in the yard, and Greaves read it standing in the morning sun, and looked up with the expression of a man who had just been handed the last piece he needed. "Will not deal with Whitmore. Stop debt be damned, stop. I will say what is true. Stop, your mother would be proud. Stop. Love your father." Clara read it in the yard. Her father would not be there in person, but his words would be. Her mother would be proud. She folded the wire, put it in her pocket. "All right," she said. The county courthouse was a wooden building with 2 ceiling fans that did not adequately address the summer heat and 12 chairs in the gallery that were fully occupied by the time the hearing started. Clara sat at the table beside Greaves. Ethan sat directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence. Daniel Whitmore sat at the opposite table with his Denver lawyer, a broad man named Cosgrove, who had arrived on the Wednesday stage and had spent the intervening days in quiet, expensive preparation. He sat with the practiced stillness of someone who was used to winning. Whitmore looked at Clara once when she came in. She looked back at him. She did not look away. Judge Holloway came in at 10, exactly a thin man with white hair and the economy of movement that came from decades on the bench, and called the room to order with a single stroke of his gavel. Cosgrove went first. He was good. Greaves had been right about that. He laid out the bond claim with precision, citing the alleged verbal arrangement between Robert Beaumont and Daniel Whitmore as the foundation of a transferable obligation, arguing that Clara's residence at Blackwood Ranch constituted an ongoing breach of that obligation, that the ranch had benefited from her labor during the breach, and that therefore Blackwood Ranch had a liability to his client. He spoke for 20 minutes. Clara listened to every word and kept her hands flat on the table. Then Greaves stood up. He was quiet for a moment. He adjusted his spectacles. He looked at Judge Holloway with the calm of a man who had done this many times and knew exactly where he was going. "Your Honor," he said, "my colleague has built a very elaborate structure. And structures are impressive things. But they require a foundation, and this one has none." He laid out the telegraph wire from her father, the absence of any document, the fact that a verbal arrangement had no legal standing as a transferable debt instrument under Colorado territorial law. He cited 3 cases. He spoke for 15 minutes. Then he placed Mary Sutton's statement on the judge's desk. He did not explain it dramatically. He simply said, "I am including for the court's record a statement from a former employee of the Hargrove household in Millhaven attesting to a pattern of conduct that directly contradicts the character of the warrant filed against my client." Cosgrove was on his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, this is not relevant to. It speaks to the pattern of conduct underlying the Millhaven warrant," Greaves said, "which my opposing counsel introduced into his opening argument as context for Miss Beaumont's alleged unreliability. I am simply providing additional context." Holloway looked at the statement. He read it in silence. He read it for a long time. Clara watched his face and could not read it. Then Holloway set the statement down and looked at Cosgrove and said, "Counselor, I'd like you to explain to me how a bond claim with no paper documentation can create a property liability against a third party." Cosgrove began to explain. Holloway listened, and then he said, "I'm going to stop you there." It took Holloway 20 minutes to make his ruling. He found the bond claim unsupported and dismissed it. He found the property claim against Blackwood Ranch without legal foundation and dismissed it. He made a formal notation that the claim appeared to have been filed without adequate documentation, and that the matter was being referred to the Territorial Commissioner's office for review. He declined to offer any supportive ruling on the Millhaven warrant. He also said quietly, and without drama, but loudly enough for the full courtroom to hear, that the pattern of conduct outlined in the Sutton statement was deeply troubling, and that he intended to write to the Millhaven court directly. He struck his gavel. The room shifted. Greaves turned to Clara and said, "That's as good as it gets." She breathed. She breathed in fully for what felt like the first time in days. She turned in her chair. Ethan was looking at her, and the expression on his face was the one she had been learning to read for 2 months, and she finally fully understood what it meant. Roy Decker, in the second row of chairs, said, "Well," in the satisfied tone of a man who had expected this outcome and was glad to be right. Cody was grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. Whitmore had not moved. His lawyer was speaking to him in a low, fast voice. He sat very still the way controlled men sat when something they had built very carefully had just collapsed. He looked at Clara once more. She did not perform anything for him. She did not look triumphant or relieved or vindicated, though she felt all of those things. She just looked at him the way she had looked at him in the yard of the ranch, as someone who was finished with him. He looked away first. She stood up. Greaves was shaking Ethan's hand. Helen Graves, who had appeared in the gallery at 9:55 without announcement, came forward and took Clara's hand in both of hers and squeezed it once hard without saying a word. Clara squeezed back. On the ride home, she and Ethan rode side by side on the road back toward the mountains. The summer sun was high, and the air smelled of dry grass and pine, and the road ahead was clear and long. "Greaves says there may still be proceedings," she said. "The Millhaven warrant, the commissioner's review." "There may be," he said. "It's not fully over." "No," he said, "not fully." He looked at the road ahead. But the worst of it is, she thought about that, about what was behind her now and what was ahead. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Last night," she said. "What you said. I want you to know I meant what I said back." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it in daylight," she said, "where I can see you properly." Something warm moved through his face. And nothing changes," she said. "I'm still not going anywhere." He looked at her for a long moment. The road stretched ahead. The mountains stood behind the ranch in the distance, dark and permanent and vast. "There's something else I want to say," he said. "In daylight, where you can see me properly." She waited. "I haven't asked a woman a question like this in a very long time," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I'm good at it." He met her eyes directly the way he did everything, without theater, without evasion. "But I'd like to marry you, Clara Beaumont, if that's something you could want." The road was quiet. A hawk turned overhead. The summer heat pressed down gold and warm around both of them. She looked at this man who had opened a gate and told her she could stay and stood between her and everything that came next without ever once making her feel small. "That's something I could want," she said. He reached across the space between their horses and held out his hand. She took it. They rode the rest of the way home, like that, hand in hand on the summer road, the mountains ahead of them and everything else behind. The news traveled faster than either of them intended. By the time they rode through the gate of Blackwood Ranch that Friday afternoon, Cody had already told Roy. Roy had told Thomas, and Thomas had told Margaret, and Margaret Hale was standing in the yard with her hands clasped and an expression on her face that she was making no effort whatsoever to conceal. Clara swung down from the saddle, and Margaret was in front of her before her boots hit the ground. "Is it true?" Margaret said. Clara looked at Ethan. He was dismounting with the careful management of his healing arm, his face carrying the particular neutral expression of a man who had said what he meant and was comfortable letting the consequences arrange themselves. "It's true," Clara said. Margaret made a sound that was not quite a word and pulled Clara into an embrace with the full force of a woman who had been quietly hoping for this outcome for weeks and was now releasing all of it at once. Clara laughed, surprise genuine, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere below thought, and held on. Roy Decker put his hand out to Ethan. Ethan shook it. "About time," Roy said. "Don't push it, Roy," Ethan said. "I've been watching you be obvious for 6 weeks," Roy said. "I'll push whatever I like." Cody was grinning from the fence post where he'd stationed himself for maximum visibility. When Clara caught his eye over Margaret's shoulder, he tipped his hat so enthusiastically it nearly fell off. The rest of the hands came in from the pasture for supper that evening, in ones and twos, and each of them found out, in the way news always traveled on the ranch quietly, one man to the next, a murmur and a nod. By the time Clara brought the food out, every one of them had found some small way to mark the occasion. Dan, the quietest hand, had put fresh flowers from somewhere in a jar on the table, which he pretended he hadn't done. Old Pete Calloway, who complained about onions at every meal, told Clara that if she wanted to put onions in the wedding supper, he supposed he could survive it just this once. She looked at him. "I'll leave the onions out, Pete," she said. "Much appreciated," he said very seriously and sat down. Ethan sat at the head of the table and looked at the room around him, the men eating and talking, the lamplight, the repaired walls and the clean floor and the smell of real food, and Clara caught him looking from across the table and knew what it meant before he said anything. She had learned to read him the way she read weather, the way she read the garden. Things that required patience and attention and a willingness to sit with the not yet knowing until the meaning became clear. He looked at her, and the meaning was clear. She looked back, and it was enough. Arthur Greaves stayed 3 more days. There were still threads to tie off his letter to the Territorial Commissioner's office needed follow-up. The formal dismissal of the property claim needed to be recorded properly. And there was the matter of the Millhaven warrant, which Holloway's letter to the Millhaven court would address, but not immediately resolve. On his last evening, Greaves sat at the kitchen table with the papers he was taking back to Denver spread in front of him, and a cup of Clara's coffee, and the expression of a man who was genuinely satisfied, which she had come to understand was not his default state. "The commissioner's office will send a formal inquiry to Whitmore's lawyer," he told them. "That alone is going to cost Cosgrove's firm more trouble than they want. They'll likely advise Whitmore to drop the remaining threads." "Likely," Ethan said. "There are no certainties in law," Greaves said, "but the risk-reward calculation has shifted completely in your favor. Pursuing this further costs Whitmore money and reputation and risks exposing the fraudulent filing. Dropping it costs him only pride." He paused. "Men like Daniel Whitmore value their pride greatly, but they value their money more." Clara thought about that, about the careful, patient malice of him, about whether pride or money would win. "And the Hargroves," she said. "The Millhaven warrant, Holloway's letter carries weight," Greaves said, "and Mary Sutton's statement is now part of the court record here. If the Hargroves want to continue pushing the warrant, they're going to have to do it knowing that a judge in another county has already questioned the pattern." He looked at her. "They may still try. I won't promise you they won't. But the ground under them is considerably less solid than it was 3 weeks ago." She nodded. "There's one more thing," Greaves said. He looked at Ethan. "The Mary Sutton situation. She's in Denver, and she's brave enough to have written that statement. But she's also carrying what happened to her alone. I think someone should reach out to her directly. Let her know what the statement accomplished. Let her know she's not alone in it." A pause. "I'll write to her," Clara said. Greaves looked at her. "Good," he said simply. He closed his folder. "Congratulations, by the way, to both of you." He said it the way he said everything, direct and unadorned, and more genuine for it. "Thank you, Arthur," Ethan said. Greaves tucked the folder under his arm and picked up his hat. "Invite me to the wedding," he said. "I'll come if I can manage the train." "You'll manage the train," Ethan said. Greaves almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "I probably will." She wrote to Mary Sutton the morning after Greaves left. She sat at the kitchen table before anyone else was up and wrote 3 pages in the quiet before dawn, the way she had written her own account on a midnight 2 months ago. Except this time, the writing felt different. Not like releasing something painful, like reaching toward something. She told Mary what had happened. She told her about the statement and what it had done in the courtroom and the look on Judge Holloway's face when he read it. She told her that her words had mattered, that they had changed something real. She did not say, "You saved me," because it wasn't only that. She had needed to save herself first. But she wrote, "You made it easier to stand," and that was true. She sealed the letter and gave it to Thomas to take to town with the morning's other correspondence. Then she poured herself coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden in the early light. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine. The herb beds were full and fragrant. The squash she had planted along the south wall had come in better than she'd hoped. Wide green leaves and fruit coming in fast. Rebecca Blackwood had planned this garden, and then it had died. and then Clara had brought it back. And now it was neither Rebecca's garden nor Clara's garden, but something that belonged to both of them and to the land itself. She thought that was all right. She thought that was more than all right. 3 weeks after the hearing, a letter came from Millhaven. Not from the Hargroves. From the Millhaven court addressed to Arthur Greaves, forwarded to Blackwood Ranch. Greaves had written a cover note in his precise hand. Holloway's letter accomplished what I hoped. Read the enclosed. The enclosed was a formal notification that the warrant against one Clara Whitmore, the name she had been known by, the name she was leaving behind, had been suspended, pending review, based on new information received regarding the conduct of the complaining party. Suspended pending review. Not dismissed. Not yet. But suspended. She read it twice. Then she walked out to the barn where Ethan was working with one of the younger horses and stood in the doorway until he noticed her. He came to her, read the letter she held out. He handed it back. "Pending review," he said. "It's not over," she said. "But it's movement," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly, the way she was trying to do everything now, with her full self, without the protective distance she had maintained for 4 years. "Like I can breathe," she said, properly, for the first time in a long time. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small gesture entirely unlike him, and maybe because it was so unlike him, it landed harder than something dramatic would have. "Good," he said. He went back to the horse. She stood in the barn doorway for another moment, holding the letter, feeling the summer air on her face, and let herself believe in what was coming. Her father arrived on a Tuesday in August. She had not told Ethan how she felt about it because she had not fully known herself. She had sent the wire asking him to come for the wedding, and the answer had come back yes, and she had carried that yes around for 2 weeks without looking at it too directly. He came off the stage looking older than she remembered, smaller somehow. The large, loud man she had feared and resented and loved without resolution for 27 years was an ordinary-sized man in a worn coat with a hat that had seen too many seasons. He saw her first. He stopped on the step of the stage. She stood on the road and looked at him. The last time she had seen him, she had been 17 years old, and he had signed her name on a piece of paper she hadn't been allowed to read. She had spent 4 years being angry about that, and 2 months learning what it felt like to be in a place where she mattered, and the combination of those things had done something to the anger, not removed it, but changed its shape, made it something she could hold without being cut by it. He came toward her slowly. He stopped 3 feet away and took his hat off. "Clara," he said. His voice was the same. That was the thing that undid her slightly, just the sound of her name in her father's voice, after 4 years of silence. "Papa," she said. He pulled her in, and she let him, and she did not cry, but it was a near thing, and she could feel that he was crying quietly, his hand on the back of her head, and she stayed in it for a moment, and then stepped back. She looked at him. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. "I want you to know that." He nodded. "I know. But you came when I needed you," she said. "And you told the truth when it would have been easy not to." She held his gaze. "That matters." "It's the least I could do," he said. "Clara, it is." He stopped. His voice was unsteady. "It is the very least." "I know," she said, "but it was something." She looked at him for a moment longer. "Come and meet Ethan." She took her father to the ranch and introduced them in the yard, and watched her father's face as he looked at the man her daughter was marrying, and watched Ethan's face as he looked at the man who had handed his daughter across a table like a debt, and understood that both of them were choosing something in that moment. Her father was choosing to be accountable. Ethan was choosing grace. Ethan put his hand out. Her father shook it. "Mr. Beaumont," Ethan said. "Mr. Blackwood," her father said. He looked at the ranch around him, the mountains, the garden visible past the corner of the house. He looked back at Ethan. "She looks well," he said. "She is well," Ethan said. "She's made this place better than it was." Her father looked at her. She looked back at him and didn't say anything because she didn't need to. The twist came on Thursday, 2 days before the wedding. Clara was in the kitchen with Margaret Hale going over the food for the celebration, and Thomas came to the door with a telegram and a look on his face that she had not seen since the worst moments of the Whitmore situation. Her stomach dropped. "What?" she said. He handed her the telegram. It was from Greaves, short and direct. Whitmore filed appeal of dismissal with Territorial Court. Denver. Stop. Cosgrove arguing procedural grounds. Stop. Hearing set next month. Stop. Do not alarm but need Ethan to contact me. Stop. Greaves. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time. Then she set it on the table and sat down. Margaret put a hand on her arm. "What does it say?" she told her. Margaret sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "He's not going to stop," Clara said. "I told Greaves that. I told Ethan that. Daniel Whitmore does not stop." "He can file all the appeals he likes," Margaret said with the quiet certainty of a woman who had watched this territory develop its legal infrastructure for 20 years. "That doesn't mean he wins them. It means it continues," Clara said. "It means this never—" She stopped. Breathed. "I am so tired of it. I am so tired of having to fight for the right to exist without him in my life." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Go find Ethan." She found him at the north fence, which was fully repaired, now the posts solid and the wire taut. He was checking the last section with Cody, and she came across the pasture with the telegram in her hand, and he saw her face from 20 yards out and was moving toward her before she reached him. She handed him the telegram without speaking. He read it. Cody stood a careful distance away looking at the fence, giving them the privacy of not looking. Ethan folded the telegram. She waited. "All right," he said. She stared at him. "That's it. All right. What do you want me to say?" "I want you to—" She stopped. She pressed her hands together. "He is not going to stop. I have been telling both of you that from the beginning, and I need you to actually hear me when I say it. He is going to keep filing. He is going to keep spending money on this. He is going to—" "I hear you," Ethan said, quiet, steady. The same tone he used when the weather turned bad, and the cattle were spooked, and the fence was down, and there were 3 problems that needed solving, and only 2 of him. She stopped. "I hear you," he said again. "He's not going to stop. I believe you. I have believed you every time you've said it." He looked at her directly. "And he can keep filing. He can file every appeal the Territorial Court will hear. He can spend every dollar he has on Cosgrove's firm. And Greaves will answer every filing, and we will fund every response, and he will not win." He paused. "Because the truth is on our side, Clara. And the truth compounds. Every filing he makes creates more record of what he's tried to do and failed to do. Every dismissal makes the next filing weaker." His voice was even and certain, and she felt it land in her chest like an anchor. "He can be relentless. So can I." She looked at him. "You're not scared," she said. "I said I was scared once," he said. "Not of this." She breathed. She thought about what it had cost her to walk 31 miles. She thought about the gate and the question, and the moment she had decided not to fold. She thought about everything she had stood up from in the last 2 months. "I'm going to write to Greaves tonight," she said. "I want to be part of the response, not just as the subject of it. I want to help build it." Something moved in his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." "I know the way Whitmore argues," she said. "I know what he'll push on and what he'll avoid. Greaves should have that." "Then we'll send it together," he said. She nodded. He reached out and took her hand. 2 days, he said. She looked at him. 2 days, she agreed. Neither of them said, "and then whatever comes after." But they both knew that was the rest of the sentence. Whatever comes after together. They were married on a Saturday morning in the last week of August. Helen Graves stood up with Clara. Roy Decker stood up with Ethan, which made Roy straighten his back in a way that suggested he had been secretly hoping for this responsibility for some time. Cody wore a clean shirt for the first time in recent memory and stood in the front row beside Thomas and Margaret and her father, and the rest of the hands filled in the rows behind them. It was not a large ceremony. It was the people who had built this story with them in one way or another, and that was exactly the right number. The preacher from town had come out to the ranch at Clara's request because she wanted to be married, where she had built something not in a building she had visited twice. She wanted to be married with the garden behind her and the mountains ahead, and the smell of summer in the air. She stood beside Ethan on the porch of Blackwood Ranch, in her good blue dress with her mother's ring on the chain around her neck, and she held his hands and looked at his face and the entire accumulated weight of the last year. The road, the gate, the kitchen table, the letter, the courtroom, the telegram. Every hard thing and every good thing lived in the moment between them, in the small space between his hands and hers. The preacher said the words. Ethan said his. She said hers. When he kissed her, Cody made an involuntary sound that was halfway between a cheer and a yell, and Roy elbowed him hard enough to nearly knock him over, and her father laughed. She heard it through the general noise. Her father's laugh, the one she had grown up with before everything went wrong, and she thought there are some things that can be recovered. Not everything, but some things. Helen Graves put a handkerchief to her eye, and then looked at it, and put it away, as though it had done something without her permission. Margaret Hale cried without apology. Thomas handed her his handkerchief without being asked which was the most Thomas Hale thing she had ever witnessed. The letter from Mary Sutton came a week after the wedding. It was 3 pages careful, and measured from a woman who had learned to be careful with her words. She thanked Clara for writing. She said she had read about the hearing through Greaves's summary letter, and had felt for the first time that what had happened to her had served some purpose beyond teaching her to be afraid. She said she had decided to write her own account. Not for a court, not yet, but for herself. To make it exist outside her body, the way Clara had described. She said, "I think I might be ready to stop running." Clara read the letter at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning. She read it once, and then she stood up and went to find Ethan, because she could not hold this alone, and because finding him was what she did now when something mattered. He was in the barn. She read him the last paragraph. He was quiet for a moment. "Write back," he said. "I'm going to," she said. "Tell her." He stopped, thought. "Tell her this place has a kitchen garden that's got more food in it than we can eat, and we've got a bunkhouse with an empty room this winter." Clara looked at him. "You're offering her a place to stay," she said. "I'm offering her an option," he said. "If she wants it. When she's ready." She stared at him for a moment. This man she had married. This man who had opened a gate for a stranger with bleeding feet and given her a chance when every other door had closed, and she thought, of course. Of course he would do this. This is who he is. This is who he has always been. She just hadn't known it yet that first day at the gate. She went back to the kitchen and wrote the letter. The territorial court dismissed Whitmore's appeal in October. Greaves sent word by telegram, the message shorter and more satisfying than any he had sent before. Appeal dismissed with prejudice. Stop Commissioner notes. Pattern of vexatious filing. Stop Cosgrove withdrew from case. This morning. Stop it is over. Stop. Greaves. Clara was in the garden when Thomas brought it out. She read it standing in the dirt with her hands still in her gloves. With prejudice. That meant the court had found the filing itself improper. That meant Whitmore couldn't refile the same claim. That meant the door was closed and locked, and the key had been removed. She read it again. Then she pulled off her gloves and walked to the barn, where Ethan was working same as always. She handed him the telegram without speaking because she didn't trust her voice yet. He read it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, and she saw it. The full release of it. The thing he had been holding steady through 4 months of filings and hearings, and late nights, and careful management of his own fury on her behalf, all of it finally put down. "Clara," he said. "I know," she said. He crossed the distance between them, and she walked into his arms, and he held her, and this time she did cry briefly fully without embarrassment, because it was over, and she was allowed to feel how much it had cost and how much it was worth. He held on until she was finished. Then she stepped back and wiped her face and picked up the telegram from where he'd set it on the barrel. "I want to put this in the kitchen book," she said. "Rebecca's book, with the recipes." He looked at her. "She was part of this," Clara said. "This ranch, this garden, this place, she built the foundation of it. I want her to be part of what comes after." He looked at the telegram in her hand. "Second page," he said. "There's a blank page behind the front cover." She nodded. She pressed the telegram flat and took it inside and opened the small, worn book and smoothed the telegram onto the second page beside the neat, formal handwriting of a woman she had never met and felt she knew. Then she closed the book and put it back on its shelf. November came in cold and clear, and the ranch settled into the rhythm of the season's turn, with the particular quiet satisfaction of a place that knew what it was and what it was for. The garden had been put to bed for the winter. The beds turned and covered the last of the harvest stored in the cold cellar, enough squash and preserved tomatoes and dried herbs to carry them well into spring. Cody had pointed this out to anyone who would listen, apparently unable to believe the abundance of it. Roy had told him to stop talking about it and just eat the soup. Mary Sutton arrived on a Thursday in the first week of November. Clara met her at the gate. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired, with the careful, guarded quality of someone who had been hurt enough to build walls and was now standing on the outside of her own walls, wondering if it was safe to come in. She had one bag. Clara recognized everything about that. She held out her hand. "Clara Blackwood," she said. Her married name still new enough to feel like something she was growing into. Mary Sutton looked at her, looked at the ranch behind her, the house, the bare garden beds. "Mary Sutton," she said, and shook her hand. "Come in," Clara said. "I have coffee on." Mary looked at the gate at the house at Clara again. "All right," she said. She came through the gate. That evening after supper, after Mary had been settled in the bunkhouse room that Ethan had made ready without fanfare, Clara sat on the porch with Ethan in the cold November dark and looked at the stars over the Colorado mountains. They were very close together, her shoulder against his arm, both of them wrapped in the heavy quilt Margaret Hale had brought over as a wedding gift without explanation, simply leaving it on the porch one morning, as if it had always been there. "She's going to be all right," Ethan said. Not a prediction, a commitment. "Yes," Clara said. "She is." He looked at the mountains. "I was thinking," he said, "about what this place is." She looked up at him. "It started as one man's land," he said. "Then it was a ranch. Then Rebecca made it a home. And then—" He paused. "I don't know what you'd call what it is now." She thought about it. She thought about Cody and Roy and Thomas and Margaret and Helen Graves and Arthur Greaves and her father and Mary Sutton, and the kitchen book with two kinds of handwriting in it, and the garden that had died and come back, and the gate that had been opened to a woman with bleeding feet and one bag and nowhere left to go. "A place where people can start over," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat in the November dark with the quilt around them and the stars burning cold and clear overhead, and the ranch settled around them in all its sounds, the horses, the wind in the eaves, the distant voice of one of the hands, the living, breathing pulse of a place that held people in it. She had walked 31 miles to a gate she had never seen before. She had knocked anyway, and everything she had ever needed was on the other side.